Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a place where the American dream went to die. August 1892 to Smet, South Dakota. A town so small you could sneeze and miss it. But on this particular afternoon, a woman steps off a train carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and a determination that could cut through steel. Her name is Laura Ingalls Wilder. She's 25 years old. Her husband can barely walk. Her 5-year-old daughter is hungry. And in her pocket she has exactly $3.47. That's it. That's everything standing between her family and complete destitution. You think you know this story. You think you know Laura Ingalls Wilder, the prairie girl with the sunbonnet and the pay who played fiddle by the fireplace. The cosy log cabins where families sang hymns and ate johnny cakes and lived happily ever after. But what if I told you that version was a lie? Not completely false, but sanitized. Scrubbed clean of the blood and desperation and soul-crushing poverty that actually defined frontier life. This is the story Laura never wanted you to know. The 2 years she spent bent over a sewing machine stitching dresses for other women while her own family barely survived. The years that don't appear in any Little House book because they were too raw, too desperate, too real. Laura stands on the train platform in Smet, and the first thing that hits her is the smell. Dust and horse manure and the sharp metallic scent of a prairie town in August, when the heat bakes everything into submission. The air is bone dry. No humidity like that suffocating Florida swamp they just escaped from. Just pure, relentless Dakota heat that makes your lips crack and your throat close up with thirst. Beside her, Almanzo Wilder limps down the platform steps, his left leg dragging like a dead thing. 4 years ago, diphtheria attacked his nervous system and left him partially paralyzed. He's 28 years old with the body of a man twice his age. Every step sends pain shooting up his spine. Every morning he wakes up wondering if today is the day his legs stop working completely. Rose, their daughter, holds tight to her mother's skirt. She's seen too much for a 5-year-old. Watched her infant brother die. Survived a house fire. Lived in 4 different places in 5 years as her parents chased one failed dream after another. She doesn't ask questions anymore. Questions require hope, and hope is dangerous when you're this poor. They're here because they have nowhere else to go. Minnesota didn't work. Florida was a disaster. The Dakota homestead they lost still haunts Almanzo's dreams. 7 years of marriage and they have nothing to show for it except debts, scars, and a daughter who's learned that adults lie when they say everything will be fine. But Laura isn't planning to fail again. She can't afford to. Within 2 days of arriving, she walks into Pook and Plum's dressmaking establishment on Main Street. It's a small shop, barely 15 feet wide, with 2 sewing machines, bolts of fabric stacked against the walls, and the sharp smell of sizing and thread oil. Mrs. Pook, the owner, is a severe woman with iron-grey hair pulled so tight it looks like it hurts. She takes one look at Laura, dusty travelling dress, worn shoes, hands already rough from work, and asks the only question that matters. "Can you sew?" Laura doesn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am. Straight seams, buttonholes, pleats, ruffles, alterations. I can copy any pattern you show me." Mrs. Pook hands her a scrap of fabric, some thread and a needle. "Show me a French seam." This is the test. A French seam encloses raw edges inside the seam itself, creating a clean finish on both sides of the fabric. It requires precision and technique. Most amateur seamstresses can't do it properly. But Laura's mother Caroline taught her to sew when she was 6 years old. Before Laura could read, she could thread a needle and maintain even stitches. Before she could cook, she could mend a torn shirt so perfectly you'd never know it had been damaged. Her fingers move quickly, fold the fabric wrong sides together, stitch a 1/4-inch seam, trim to an 1/8 inch, turn the fabric right sides together, enclosing the raw edge, stitch again at 3/8 inch, open it flat. Perfect. Mrs. Pook examines the work, holding it up to the window light, checking the stitch tension and alignment. Finally she nods. $3 a week, 6 days, 8 hours daily. You provide your own thread for practice work. You pay for any fabric you ruin. You start Monday. $3 a week. That's 42 cents a day. In $1892, That will buy approximately 7 pounds of flour, or 2 pounds of coffee, or 1 pound of butter and a dozen eggs. It's barely survival wages. It's less than half what a male labourer makes for the same hours, but it's income. It's the difference between eating and starving, between having shelter and sleeping in a wagon, between trying again and giving up completely. Laura takes the job. The work begins before dawn. Laura wakes in the rented room they can barely afford. 12 feet by 14 feet, furnished with a bed frame, 1 chair, and a washstand. The walls are thin enough that she can hear their neighbours coughing. The floor is rough pine that splinters bare feet. The window faces east, which means summer sunlight hits the room like a hammer at 6 in the morning. She dresses in the dark. Her work dress is brown calico, already worn thin at the elbows, patched at the hem where it dragged through mud. She pins her hair into a tight bun. No breakfast yet. That comes later, after Almanzo wakes and starts the stove, after Rose is dressed and ready for the day. Right now, in this pre-dawn darkness, Laura exists in a silent space where she prepares herself mentally for 8 hours of repetitive motion and forced pleasantness. By 6:45, she's walking down Main Street. De Smet in September 1892 is a town of maybe 500 people. Everyone knows everyone's business. Everyone knows the Wilders came back broke. Everyone knows Almanzo is crippled. Everyone knows Laura is working for wages, which for a married woman carries a certain shame, an implicit admission that her husband can't provide. Laura doesn't care what they think. She cares about the 42 cents she'll earn today, about the mathematical certainty that 7 6-day weeks equals $21, that $21 will cover rent, flour, beans, lard, and cornmeal with maybe $2 left over. Maybe. The shop smells like cotton dust and machine oil, and the faint chemical bite of fabric dye. Mrs. Pook is already there, threading one of the sewing machines, a Singer treadle model that cost more than Laura's family owned. The machine is black iron and gold detailing, mechanical precision made beautiful. You sit at it, feed fabric under the presser foot, work the treadle with your feet to drive the needle, and guide the fabric with your hands. When operated correctly, it can stitch faster than 10 hand sewers combined. When operated incorrectly, it can drive a needle through your finger and into the wooden base. Laura's first task is hemming dish towels for a local merchant. Not glamorous work, not technically demanding. Just feed the fabric through, maintain a straight line 3/8 of an inch from the edge, stitch continuously for 8 feet, cut the thread, start the next one. She'll do 40 towels today, maybe 50 if she doesn't stop for breaks she can't afford anyway. The physical mechanics are simple. Your right foot presses the treadle forward, which rotates a wheel, which drives the needle up and down through the fabric. Your hands guide the material, keeping the edge aligned with a mark on the machine bed. Your eyes track the needle position constantly, because one moment of inattention means a crooked seam, which means ripping it out and starting over, which means wasted time you don't get paid for. After the first hour, her back starts aching. The chair is wooden, no cushion, designed for function, not comfort. Your spine curves forward as you lean over the work. Your shoulders hunch. Your neck bends at an angle that by hour 8 will feel like someone's driving railroad spikes into your vertebrae. By hour 3, her fingers are cramping. The constant micro-adjustments required to keep fabric aligned create repetitive stress that accumulates in the small muscles of your hands. Thread tension has to be monitored continuously. Too loose and the stitches pull out. Too tight and the fabric puckers. You adjust by feel, by tiny turns of the tension dial, by instinct developed over thousands of seams. At noon, Mrs. Pook allows a 30-minute break. Laura doesn't go home. It's too far to walk there and back in 30 minutes. Instead, she eats the lunch she packed. A piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth, an apple if they're lucky enough to afford one. She sits on a bench behind the shop, in the narrow alley where the autumn sun provides warmth without being oppressive. This is when she lets herself think about numbers. $3 this week, $3 next week. Rent is $10 monthly. Food averages $25 monthly if they're careful. That means they need $35 monthly just to survive. 4 weeks of work provides $12. Almanzo is bringing in maybe $8 to $10 monthly from odd carpentry jobs and day labour when his leg allows. Together they're making $20 to $22 monthly. They're losing ground. The mathematics are brutal and undeniable. Every month they fall $10 to $15 deeper into a hole they can't climb out of. Every month they're one crisis away from complete disaster. But Laura has a plan. She doesn't share it yet because plans require hope, and hope requires protection from the people who might tell you it's impossible. But in her head, she's calculating. Missouri land costs $4 to $6 per acre. 40 acres would be $240, but the railroad companies offer payment plans. Put down $100, pay the rest over time. $100 would give them land. Land would give them a chance. A chance is all she's asking for. $100. At $3 per week, that's 33 weeks. Add Almanzo's income, and maybe they can do it in 20 weeks. 20 weeks is 5 months. 5 months is spring 1893. Spring means planting season. Planting season means they could start a farm the same year they buy land. The plan is insane. The plan requires nothing going wrong for 5 months straight. The plan requires her body holding up under work that's designed to destroy women's health. The plan requires Almanzo staying employed despite his disability. The plan requires Rose not getting sick, not needing a doctor, not costing them the margin they're trying to save, but it's the only plan they have. At 12:30, Laura goes back inside. 4 more hours of stitching. 4 more hours of back pain and finger cramps and the relentless mechanical rhythm of the treadle, driving the needle through fabric. 4 more hours toward 42 cents. 4 more hours toward $100. 4 more hours toward Missouri. Winter 1892 comes early to Dakota Territory. By November, morning temperatures hit 20 below zero. The kind of cold that makes your lungs hurt when you breathe. The kind of cold that freezes your eyelashes if you're outside too long. The kind of cold that turns the walk to work into a test of whether you want to survive badly enough to suffer for it. Laura walks to the dress shop in darkness now. Sunrise doesn't happen until after 7, and she needs to be working by 7. She wraps her head in a wool shawl that covers everything but her eyes. She wears 2 pairs of stockings and her heaviest boots. Her hands are protected by mittens Caroline made years ago, still functional despite being more darn than original knitting. The shop is heated by a coal stove in the corner. Mrs. Pook arrives at 6:30 to start the fire, but the building doesn't warm up until 8 or 9. For those first 2 hours, you work in temperatures maybe 45 degrees if you're lucky. Your fingers are stiff. The machine oil gets thick and sluggish. The fabric feels brittle, like it might crack if you fold it wrong. But the work continues. Because work always continues when you're poor. Because cold is just discomfort. And discomfort is irrelevant when the alternative is starvation. By December, Laura has saved $17. $17 represents 8 weeks of work at $3 per week, minus the $2 she allowed herself for Rose's shoes when the old ones fell apart. $17 is 7% of $100. 7% of a future. 7% of Missouri. She keeps the money in a small leather purse she carries pinned inside her dress, against her ribs, where she can feel its weight with every breath. She doesn't tell Almanzo the exact amount, not because she doesn't trust him, but because she doesn't trust fate. Every time they've had something, fate has taken it away. The crops failed. The house burned. The baby died. The Florida dream collapsed. Telling someone about money feels like inviting disaster to notice them again. Almanzo is working when his leg allows. He's picked up carpentry jobs, repairing a barn door here, building a chicken coop there. He's good with his hands, always has been. Even with the paralysis, he can measure and cut and join wood with precision most carpenters would envy. But he can't stand for full days anymore. Can't lift heavy beams. Can't do the physical labour that pays the best wages. He brings home $6 in November, $8 in December. In January, when a cold snap makes outdoor work impossible and his leg is screaming with pain every morning, he makes $4 total. $4 for an entire month. $4 that barely covers the firewood they're burning to avoid freezing to death. But Rose is surviving. That's the victory Laura won't name out loud because naming it might jinx it. Rose is eating enough, growing, learning to read, playing with other children when Laura allows it, which isn't often because childhood friendship requires time and energy their family can't spare. But Rose is alive and healthy, and in a time when childhood mortality hovers around 20%, that counts as success. The work at the dress shop evolves as Laura proves her competence. By January 1893, she's no longer hemming dish towels. She's making actual dresses. Taking measurements from customers, cutting fabric according to patterns, assembling bodices and skirts and sleeves, fitting garments to women's bodies, pinning and adjusting until the fabric drapes correctly, then taking it apart and stitching the final seams. It's skilled work. It pays $4 per week instead of $3. That extra dollar per week is huge. $4 weekly is $16 monthly. Combined with Almanzo's inconsistent income, they might actually break even some months. Might actually stop losing ground. Might actually start saving at a rate that makes Missouri more than a fantasy. But the work is also harder. Making a complete dress from scratch takes precision and knowledge that hemming towels never required. You need to understand how fabric drapes, how bodies move, how seams should be placed to allow for breathing and bending and reaching without splitting, how to insert sleeves so the shoulder sits correctly, how to attach a collar so it lies flat, how to finish a hem so it hangs evenly despite the wearer's inevitable differences in posture and proportion. Laura learns by doing, by making mistakes on practice fabric and absorbing the cost, by watching Mrs. Pook work and memorizing techniques, by staying late, unpaid, to practice cutting patterns until she can do it accurately. Every skill she acquires is another dollar in potential earnings. Every technique she masters is another step toward Missouri. By March 1893, she saved $38. $38 representing 7 months of work, 7 months of walking to the shop in darkness and cold, 7 months of back pain and finger cramps and the soul-crushing monotony of repetitive motion, 7 months of watching other women wear dresses she made while she continues wearing the same patched brown calico she started with. $38. 38% of $100. 38% of a dream that refuses to die, despite everything the universe has thrown at them. And she's not stopping, not slowing down, not allowing herself to imagine failure because failure means admitting the last 7 years were for nothing, means accepting that they'll never escape the poverty that's been grinding them down since they married, means Rose grows up the same way Laura did, always hungry, always wearing hand-me-downs, always aware that money is the wall between her and everything she might become. Missouri is out there, waiting. 40 acres of possibility, 40 acres of maybe, 40 acres purchased with needle and thread, and a woman's refusal to quit. Laura Ingalls. Wilder is going to save $100, and then she's getting her family the hell out of South Dakota. April 1893. Laura walks to the dress shop on a morning when the air feels different. Not the weather. The weather is typical Dakota spring. Still cold at dawn, wind cutting through her shawl, mud from yesterday's rain making the streets treacherous. It's something else, something she can't name yet but can feel in the way Mrs. Pook's face looks when Laura arrives at 7 in the morning. Banks are closing, Mrs. Pook says instead of good morning, in Philadelphia, New York, Chicago. They're saying it's spreading. Laura hangs her shawl on the hook and moves to her sewing machine. She's heard rumours. Everyone's heard rumours. The economy has been unstable since the silver purchase laws changed. Farmers are already struggling. Prices have been falling. But banks closing? That's different. That's the kind of news that changes everything. By May, it's not rumours anymore. It's reality. The panic of 1893 hits Dakota territory like a second drought, invisible but devastating. Banks fail. Credit evaporates. Businesses close. Farmers who were barely surviving before are now facing complete ruin. And in Smet, a town of maybe 400 people, whose entire economy depends on agriculture, the panic means everyone gets poorer simultaneously. Mrs. Pook cuts Laura's hours, not because Laura's work is inadequate, Not because business is slow in the normal sense, but because customers can't pay. Women who used to bring in dresses for alterations twice monthly now make their own repairs. Women who ordered new garments for spring now make do with what they have. The money simply isn't there anymore. Laura goes from earning $3 weekly to earning maybe $2. Some weeks, $1.50. Some weeks, nothing at all except the promise that when business improves, the hours will return. The timing is catastrophic. March 1893, she had $38 saved. She was calculating. 20 weeks more at $3 weekly would give her enough for Missouri. 20 weeks is 5 months. By August, they could leave, except now she's earning 2/3 of what she was earning before, and sometimes less. The mathematics shift from difficult to nearly impossible. At $2 weekly, she needs 50 weeks to reach $100. 50 weeks is nearly a year. That pushes departure to spring 1894, another full year in Smet. Almanzo's work dries up too. Carpentry depends on people having money to pay for repairs and improvements. When everyone's broke, they make do with broken doors and leaking roofs. His income drops from $8 monthly to maybe $4, some months too. They're not just failing to save anymore. They're losing ground. The rent still costs $10 monthly. Food still costs $25 if they're careful. They need $35 minimum just to survive, and some months they're bringing in less than $30. This is when most families would give up. Would accept that Missouri is a fantasy, that Smet is permanent, that poverty is the new normal and dreams need to be adjusted to match reality. Laura doesn't give up. She gets meaner. She cuts their food budget to $20 monthly. They eat cornmeal and beans and nothing else. No butter, no sugar, no coffee except on Sundays. No meat unless Almanzo can shoot a rabbit, which costs nothing but the bullet. Rose, now 6 years old, stops growing. Not dangerously. Not enough that anyone would call it malnutrition. But her dresses don't need letting out that summer, and her shoes last longer than they should. Laura cuts everywhere possible. She stops buying thread for home mending, uses thread from the shop, replacing it later when she can. She stops heating water for Saturday baths. They wash in cold water or don't wash. She stops buying kerosene for evening lamps. They go to bed when the sun sets because darkness is free. The $38 she saved by March sits in the leather purse pinned inside her dress. She doesn't touch it. Doesn't spend it even when they're hungry. Even when Rose needs new shoes and Laura has to stuff newspaper in the old ones to make them last another month. Even when Almanzo's leg is screaming with pain and a doctor might help but costs money they can't spare. The $38 is sacred. It's the foundation of everything. Spending it means starting over from zero, means admitting that Missouri is impossible, means accepting that they'll be in Smet forever, broken, stuck, and defined by failure. So the $38 stays untouched. And somehow, impossibly, through the worst economic depression in American history, Laura continues adding to it. $5 in June, $3 in July, nothing in August because there's literally no work. $2 in September. By October 1893, she has $48. $10 added in 6 months, during a period when the national economy collapsed and people were losing everything. It's not fast enough. At this rate, Missouri is 2 years away, maybe 3, but it's progress. It's movement in the right direction when everyone else is moving backward. November brings the first hard frost. Rose turns 7. The dress shop closes for 2 weeks because Mrs. Pook can't afford heating coal. Laura uses the time to take in mending at home, charging less, working more hours, generating pennies instead of dollars. December, the coldest month, brings $5, mending shirts for farmers, patching trousers, alterations on garments being handed down from older children to younger siblings because no one can afford new clothes. It's depressing work. But it's work. By January 1894, Laura has $53, $15 added in the 6 months since the panic began. The mathematics are brutal. She needs $47 more. At the current rate, assuming the economy doesn't get worse, that's maybe 20 weeks, 5 months, which means June departure at the earliest. Except She's not counting on the economy staying stable. She's counting on it getting worse, planning for worst-case scenarios, calculating how much longer they can survive in Smet before they're not just poor but destitute. The answer is maybe one more year. Maybe. If nothing goes wrong, if no one gets sick, if no new disasters arrive to destroy what little they have left, Missouri isn't a dream anymore, it's necessity. It's the only option left that doesn't end with them dying, broke in a South Dakota town that represents everything they failed to achieve. So Laura keeps sewing, keeps adding dollars to the purse, keeps calculating how many more months until $53 becomes $100 and $100 becomes 40 acres, and 40 acres becomes something that isn't this. February 1894. Almanzo brings home a pamphlet. It's colourful, professionally printed, the kind of publication that costs real money to produce, which means someone believes they'll make more money back by distributing it. The title reads The Ozarks, Land of the Big Red Apple. Below the title is an illustration of an orchard in full fruit, branches heavy with perfect red apples, a farmer standing beside a wagon loaded with barrels. Laura looks at it the way she looks at all promotional literature, with suspicion, with the understanding that every promise she's ever believed has turned into disaster, with the knowledge that pamphlets show you the dream and hide the reality. Missouri, Almanzo says, pointing to the text. Wright County, near a town called Mansfield. They're selling land for $4 to $6 per acre, claiming 40 to 45 inches of rain yearly, 200 frost-free days. Apples, peaches, grapes, timber for building, game for hunting. Laura reads the pamphlet carefully. It promises paradise, mild winters, reliable rain. Soil that grows anything. Prosperity waiting for anyone willing to work. It's exactly the kind of promises that railroad companies made about Dakota Territory 20 years ago. Those promises were lies. Or rather, they were true for 5% of settlers and catastrophically false for the other 95%. Why would we believe this, Laura asks? Not hostile, just practical. How is this different from Dakota or Florida? Almanzo has clearly anticipated this question. He unfolds a map showing rainfall patterns across the United States. Missouri, in the map's color coding, receives significantly more precipitation than Dakota Territory. The numbers aren't lies. They're documented climatological data collected over decades. Dakota gets 16 to 20 inches of rain yearly, he says. We farmed during drought years that got 12. You can't grow wheat consistently on 12 inches, but Missouri, 40 inches. Even in bad years, it's 30. That's enough for orchards, for gardens, for crops that don't require gambling everything on weather. Laura looks at the map, looks at the pamphlet, looks at her husband whose leg is dragging worse this winter, who's in pain every morning, who needs climate that won't destroy him the way Dakota winter destroyed him. How much land can we afford, she asks. Almanzo does calculations on paper, scribbles numbers, crosses them out, tries again. If we can save $100 total, we can buy 40 acres with down payment and mortgage the rest. 40 acres at $5 per acre is $200. Put $100 down, owe $100 on mortgage. We pay the mortgage over 5 years from farm production. $100. Laura currently has 53. She needs 47 more. At her current earning rate, maybe $2 weekly if she's lucky, that's 24 weeks, 6 months, which means August departure at the earliest. We'd need money for the journey too, Laura points out. Wagon travel from here to Missouri is 600 miles. Figure 45 days on the road. We need food, grain for the horses, maybe hotel rooms, supplies. That's another $20 to $30 minimum. The mathematics shift again. Not $100 total. 120. Maybe 130 to be safe. She needs $70 more. At $2 weekly, that's 35 weeks. 8 months, which pushes departure to September or October. Almanzo watches her calculate. Watches her face as the numbers stretch the timeline further into an uncertain future. We could leave with less, he suggests. Take the risk. Arrive in Missouri with minimal reserves and hope we can find work immediately. Laura thinks about arriving in a strange place with no money, no cushion, no margin for error. Thinks about what happens if they can't find work. If the land they purchase turns out to be worthless. If Missouri fails the way Dakota and Florida failed. No, she says finally. If we do this, we do it with enough resources to survive the first winter. We don't arrive desperate, we arrive with options. So the target becomes $120, maybe $130. Laura has 53. She needs 70 more. That's 9 months of work, which means July 1894, departure, July. That's 5 months away. 5 months of sewing and saving and refusing to spend money on anything except absolute necessities. 5 months of cornmeal and beans and cold water and darkness after sunset. 5 months of watching Rose wear clothes that don't fit and shoes that hurt and never complaining, because she understands that complaining changes nothing. But it's possible. The mathematics work. If Laura can maintain $2 weekly income, if Almanzo can contribute another $1 weekly, if nothing catastrophic happens, they can save $70 by July. They can leave for Missouri with enough money to purchase land and survive until they're established. For the first time since the Panic of 1893 began, Laura allows herself to imagine actually leaving, not as fantasy, as plan. As achievable goal with specific timeline and concrete steps, Missouri, Ozark Hills, 40 acres, apple orchards that bear fruit without depending on Dakota rainfall, gardens that grow because the climate cooperates, a fresh start in a place where no one knows they failed. It's not certain. Nothing is certain. The pamphlet might be lies. The land might be worthless. Missouri might fail just like everywhere else failed. But it's chance. It's an option. It's something other than staying in Smet forever, broke and stuck. Laura folds the pamphlet carefully, puts it in her trunk alongside the leather purse containing $53. $53 that will become $120 that will become 40 acres that will become, what? Success? Home? The place where they finally stop running? She doesn't know. Can't know. Won't know until they arrive and try and either fail or succeed, but she's done waiting to find out. July 1894. That's the deadline. That's when the accumulation ends and the actual attempt begins. 5 months, $70. Then they leave for Missouri, or they die trying March 1894. Spring arrives differently this year. Not because the weather changes. Dakota spring is still cold mud and late frost and wind that cuts through worn wool shawls, but because Laura wakes each morning and calculates days remaining until July 17th. 4 months, 16 weeks, 112 days until departure. She has $58 now. $5 added in February through work that barely qualified as sewing, mending sheets, patching children's clothes, alterations so minor they're almost insulting. But $5 is $5. Every addition matters when you're counting toward 120. Mrs. Pook notices the change in Laura, notices she's working faster, taking projects other seamstresses refuse because they're tedious or poorly paid, staying late without being asked, coming in early before the shop officially opens. "You're leaving, aren't you?" Mrs. Pook asks one morning in April. Not accusatory, just observant. Laura doesn't see the point in lying. Missouri, July. If we can save enough. Mrs. Pook nods. Doesn't try to talk her out of it. Doesn't suggest Smet might improve or that leaving is giving up. She just says, "You've been a good worker. I'll write you a reference if you need it for Missouri employment." This is kindness. Small, practical kindness from a businesswoman who understands that people do what they must to survive. Laura thanks her and returns to the dress she's hemming. April brings $13, the best month since before the panic. Spring means weddings, which means dresses. Means families who've been making do all winter finally have enough cash from spring sales of livestock or stored grain to afford new clothes. Means Laura works 12-hour days, 6 days weekly, and collapses on Sundays too exhausted to attend church. $71 total now. $49 to go. May brings $11. Rose finishes the school year. She's 7 years old and reading at a level that impresses her teacher. She asks for the first time why they're leaving. Why Missouri? Why not stay where Grandpa and Grandma Ingalls live? Why not stay where she has friends? Laura considers lying, making it sound like adventure, like opportunity, like choice rather than necessity. But Rose has watched them struggle for 2 years, has eaten cornmeal and beans while other children ate meat, has worn patched dresses to school. She deserves truth. Because Dakota doesn't work for us, Laura says. We tried farming here. It failed. We tried staying here. We're barely surviving. Missouri might fail too, but it might not, and we have to try. Rose thinks about this. When we get to Missouri, will we have enough food? The question breaks Laura's heart. 7 years old, and her primary concern is whether there will be enough food. Yes, Laura promises, in Missouri we'll have enough. She doesn't know if this is true, can't guarantee it. But she promises anyway, because what else can you promise a child who's never known security? $82 total by end of May. $38 to go. 6 weeks until departure. The mathematics are close now. Close enough that Laura starts planning the actual journey. What to bring, what to leave, how to pack a wagon to fit 3 people and all their possessions for a 650-mile journey. June brings the most difficult $10. The shop is slow. Mrs. Pook might need to close permanently. She mentions this casually, but Laura hears the fear underneath. The panic isn't over. The economy hasn't recovered. Businesses are still failing. People are still broke. Laura takes mending work home, sews by daylight at the cabin window because they can't afford lamp oil. Her fingers cramp. Her back aches. Her eyes hurt from focusing on tiny stitches in insufficient light. But she finishes the work, returns it, collects the pittance it pays, adds it to the purse. $92 by mid-June. $28 to go. 3 weeks until July 17th. The final push happens in the last 2 weeks of June. Laura takes every job available. Mending, alterations, new garments. She works 18-hour days, sleeps 4 hours, wakes and works again. Almanzo finds work hauling freight. Rose helps pack their possessions. The entire family is moving toward the deadline with the intensity of people who understand this is the last chance. July 10th. Laura counts the money in the leather purse one more time. Bills and coins spread across the table. Almanzo watches. Rose watches. The total is $118. $2 short of target, but close enough. They've spent 2 years accumulating this money. 2 years of work that ground them down to nothing. 2 years of saving while everyone around them spent. 2 years of saying no to everything except the most basic survival needs. $118. In July 1894, that's roughly 4 months' wages for a skilled worker. It's enough to buy 40 acres of Missouri land with down payment and have $18 remaining for the journey and first months in a new place. It's barely adequate. It's not safety. But it's enough to try. July 17th, 1894. Laura wakes before dawn. They've sold everything that won't fit in the wagon, given away items too heavy to carry. Said goodbye to Charles and Caroline Ingalls, Laura's parents, who she might never see again, because 650 miles might as well be 6,000 when you're poor. The wagon is packed. The horses are harnessed. Rose sits in the back, surrounded by their possessions. Cookware, tools, bedding, Laura's sewing basket, Almanzo's carpentry equipment, the leather purse with $118. They leave to Smet, heading south as the sun rises. Leave behind the graves and the failures and the 2 years of grinding poverty that somehow produced enough money to try again. Leave toward Missouri, toward 40 acres, toward whatever comes next. Laura doesn't look back. She never looks back. Looking back means remembering what was lost. Looking forward means imagining what might be gained. The journey to Missouri begins now. The journey to Rocky Ridge Farm. The journey to home. July 17th, 1894, 4 a.m. Laura wakes in darkness and knows this is the last time she'll sleep in this rented room. The last time she'll wake to Dakota silence. The last time she'll be a person who lives in Smet, South Dakota. Today, they leave. After 2 years of saving. After 23 months of stitching and calculating and refusing to spend money on anything except survival. After watching the leather purse grow heavy with bills and coins that represent 42,000 stitches. Give or take, the wagon is already packed. Almanzo spent yesterday afternoon loading everything they own into a space 12 feet long by 4 feet wide. Cookware, bedding, tools, his carpentry equipment, Laura's sewing basket, Rose's one doll. The leather purse with $118 pinned inside Laura's dress where she can feel it against her ribs with every breath. $118. 40 acres. The difference between trying again and giving up forever. She dresses quietly, brown calico work dress, same dress she wore to the shop yesterday for the last time. Mrs. Pook had hugged her goodbye. Actually hugged her. A severe woman who never showed emotion, wrapping her arms around Laura and saying, "You're a good worker. Don't let Missouri tell you different." Laura hadn't cried then. Won't cry now. Crying is for people who have energy to waste on feelings that don't change anything. By 5, they're at her parents' house. Charles and Caroline Ingalls, awake and waiting. Mary is there too. Laura's older sister, blind since scarlet fever took her sight 14 years ago. Carrie and Grace, the younger sisters, still children really. The whole family gathered to say goodbye to people who might never return. The mathematics are brutal. De Smet to Mansfield is 650 miles. That's 40 days of wagon travel. That's expensive. That's not the kind of journey you make casually to visit family. This might be the last time Laura sees her father. Charles is 58. His back bent from decades of labour that never quite paid off. His dark hair is streaked with grey now. His hands shake slightly when he hugs Rose. "You take care of your ma and pa," he tells his granddaughter, 7 years old and solemn as a judge. She nods seriously. Caroline hands Laura a bundle. Food for the journey, cornbread wrapped in cloth, dried apples, a jar of preserves that represent sugar Caroline couldn't really afford. "Right when you arrive," she says, "not if. When." Because failure isn't something you prepare for out loud, Laura promises. Knows she'll keep the promise. Knows her mother needs to believe this separation is temporary, even though both of them understand it's probably permanent. They leave as the sun rises, wagon rolling south down Main Street. Past the dress shop where Laura spent 2 years bent over fabric. Past the church. Past the cemetery where their infant son is buried under a marker that just says Baby Boy Wilder. Past the life they failed to build. Rose sits in the back of the wagon, watching De Smet disappear behind them. She doesn't cry either. 7 years old and she's already learned that crying doesn't bring back what you lose. It just makes your face hurt. The first day they make 14 miles. The horses are older now, not the strong Morgans Almanzo had when they married. Those horses were sold years ago to pay debts. These horses are adequate, serviceable, the kind of horses you buy when you need transportation and can't afford preferences. They camp at sunset beside a creek. Almanzo builds a fire. Laura unpacks cornmeal in the cast-iron skillet, cooks johnny cakes in lard. 3 johnny cakes each, water from the creek, nothing else. This is survival food. This is what you eat when every penny counts. Rose falls asleep immediately after eating, exhausted from a day of sitting in a wagon watching landscape roll past. Laura and Almanzo sit by the fire in silence, not uncomfortable silence. Just the silence of 2 people who've said everything that needs saying, and now they're just doing the work. "You think Missouri is different?" Almanzo asks finally. Not hopeful, just curious. Laura considers this. Thinks about the pamphlet promising the land of the big red apple. Thinks about the rainfall statistics. Thinks about the lies they've believed before. Dakota was supposed to be paradise. Florida was supposed to heal Almanzo's legs. Every promise turned into disaster. "I think Missouri is what we make it," she says finally. "Same as everywhere else, except this time we're going with cash and a plan instead of her hope and stupidity." Almanzo laughs. Actual laughter. Rare enough that Laura looks at him in surprise. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "I didn't promise to be romantic. I promised not to obey." You knew what you were getting. They sit in comfortable silence. The fire burns down to coals. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote calls. The sound carries across the prairie the way it always has, the way it will after they're gone, after everyone who tried to farm this land has given up and moved on, after the prairie reclaims what was never really conquered in the first place. Tomorrow they'll make another 14 miles, then 14 more, then 14 more. 46 days of this. 46 days until they reach Mansfield, until they see what $118 actually buys when you're desperate enough to believe promotional literature one more time. Laura lies down beside Rose in the wagon bed, stares up at stars that look the same in Dakota as they will in Missouri. Stars don't care about human plans. Don't care about hope or failure or women who saved 42,000 stitches worth of money to escape a place that broke them. She sleeps. Tomorrow the journey continues. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow until they reach the place where they'll either finally succeed or run out of places to fail. Day 12. Somewhere in Nebraska. Laura wakes to rain hammering the canvas stretched over the wagon. Not gentle rain. Not the soft Dakota drizzle that barely dampens the dust. This is Nebraska summer rain. Violent. Aggressive. The kind that turns roads into rivers and travel into gambling. They don't move today. Can't. The horses can't pull a loaded wagon through mud that deep. So they sit. Under the canvas. In the cramped wagon bed that smells like wet canvas and mildew and 3 people living too close together. Rose reads. Laura mends a tear in Almanzo's shirt. Almanzo stares at the rain and calculates. We're losing a day, he says, not accusing, just stating fact. Laura knows. Every day of delay costs money. The 15 cents they would have spent on grain for the horses still needs to be spent. They still need to eat. Time costs money even when you're standing still. The budget allowed for 40 days of travel. They're on day 12 and they've only made maybe 170 miles. They're behind schedule, behind budget. Can't control weather, Laura says, which is true but doesn't help. You can't control weather, but weather can kill you anyway. Weather doesn't care about your $118 or your careful plans or your desperate need to reach Missouri before the money runs out. Day 18, Kansas. The landscape is changing. Not dramatically, not obviously, but Laura notices. The grass is different, taller, greener. There are more trees, not forests. Just clusters of cottonwoods along creek beds where Dakota had nothing but sparse scrub. More rain here. That's what the pamphlets promised about Missouri. 40 to 45 inches annually instead of Dakota's 20. More rain means more grass, means livestock that don't starve, means crops that don't fail, means maybe, possibly, perhaps, a chance at success. Or it means humidity and mosquitoes and different ways to fail that they haven't experienced yet. They pass another wagon heading north, away from where they're going. A family with hollow eyes and thin children. The man driving doesn't wave, doesn't acknowledge them. Just keeps his eyes on the road like he's afraid if he looks at them he'll have to explain why he's leaving the promised land. Almanzo and Laura don't comment, don't speculate, but both of them are thinking the same thing. That family is running from Missouri, running from whatever they found there, running the same way the Wilders ran from Dakota. What if Missouri is just another place where people run from? Day 26. They're in Kansas still, making slower progress than planned. The horses are tired. Almanzo's leg is bothering him more. The constant sitting, the jolting of the wagon over rough roads. By evening his face is grey with pain, and he walks with a limp so pronounced he can barely stand. Laura drives the wagon the next day. Has to. Almanzo can't. She's never driven a team this far before. Never managed horses for 12 hours straight, but she learns. Same way she learned to sew, same way she learned to teach, same way she learned every skill that survival demanded. Her arms ache by sunset, her shoulders scream, her hands are blistered from the reins, but they made 13 miles, not 14, not the 15 they need to stay on schedule, but 13. Progress. Day 32, Missouri finally. They cross the border and nothing changes. The grass doesn't suddenly become greener. The air doesn't smell like apples. There's no welcome sign promising paradise. Just more road, more trees, more slow miles at 14 per day while the money in Laura's dress gets lighter every time she buys grain or pays for a night in a boarding house or spends 15 cents on eggs and bacon. $86 left now. Spent $32 on the journey so far. Food, grain, occasional shelter, emergency repairs when a wagon wheel cracked and needed a blacksmith. The mathematics are getting tight. They need to arrive with enough money for the down payment and first month's supplies. Need at least $70 remaining. Maybe $60 if they're willing to gamble. They're gambling either way. This entire journey is a gamble. But Laura has learned the difference between smart gambles and stupid ones. Dakota was a stupid gamble. Florida was desperate stupidity. Missouri might be smart, or it might be the last place they try before they run out of money and options and hope. Day 41. They reach a town called Mansfield, Wright County, Ozark region. Population maybe 400 people. Small, smaller than De Smet, but established. There's a bank, a general store, a hotel, a newspaper office. The buildings are wood frame, painted, permanent. This is civilization. Not much civilization, but more than Laura expected this far from major cities. They spend 2 nights in the hotel, $2 total. Spend it because they need to rest, need to wash, need to ask around about available land, need to understand what they're buying before they commit the money that represents 2 years of Laura's fingers cramping over fabric. On August 30th, a man named Mr. Freeman takes them to see a property. 40 acres, 4 miles outside town. Purchase price $500, $100 down, $400 on mortgage at 6% interest. Annual payment of $24 plus interest. Due every year forever, until it's paid off or they lose the land. Freeman is a land agent. Professional optimist. His job is to sell property to desperate people who need to believe this place is different from wherever they came from. He talks about the timber, the spring that never runs dry, the 400 apple seedlings already planted, the potential. Laura listens, nods, watches Almanzo's face for reactions. Neither of them speaks until Freeman drives away, promising to return tomorrow for their decision. Then they stand on the hillside Freeman showed them. Stand among the rocks and the timber and the thin soil that barely covers limestone bedrock. Stand beside the one-room log cabin that's supposed to be shelter. Stand and look at what $100 buys when you're broke and desperate and out of options. It's terrible, Rose says, 7 years old and honest. It's all rocks. She's right. The property is maybe 40% rock by volume. Limestone chunks the size of bread loaves scattered everywhere. Trees so thick you can barely see 50 feet. Soil so thin that growing anything will require miracles or labour that might kill them. Laura thinks about De Smet, about the flat prairie where you could see storms coming from 20 miles away, about the grass that grew thick before the drought killed it, about the land that looked like paradise until it revealed itself as hell with better lighting. This land doesn't even pretend to be paradise. It's honest. It's rocks and timber and difficulty written so clearly that even promotional literature couldn't hide it, which might be better, might mean the disappointment is already priced in. We're taking it, Laura says. Almanzo looks at her. You sure? She's not sure. Can't be sure, but certainty is a luxury for people with options. We came here to buy land. This is land. We can afford it. That's as sure as we're going to get. The next morning they sign papers, $100 down. Freeman hands them a deed. They hand him money that represents 9 years of marriage, 2 years of saving, 42,000 stitches, everything they have. They own 40 acres in Missouri, Rocky Ridge Farm, named for the obvious reason. This is home now, for better or worse, until success or death. September 1st, 1894. Laura wakes in the one-room cabin that represents the sum total of her real estate holdings. The cabin measures maybe 12 feet by 14 feet. Log walls, dirt floor, one window opening with no glass, no door, just a frame with cloth tacked across it. The roof leaks in 3 places, but it hasn't rained since they arrived, so that's fine, for now. The cabin came with the property, technically free, actually worth less than nothing because living in it requires pretending you have standards low enough to call this shelter. But it's theirs, that's something. After 9 years of renting, after losing the Dakota homestead, after Florida and Smet and 2 years of saving to reach this moment. They own this cabin, they own this land, they own 400 apple seedlings and whatever is growing under all those rocks in the spring that better not run dry, because if it does, they're finished. Almanzo is already awake, already outside. Laura can hear him moving around, assessing, making mental lists of what needs doing first, second, third. There's no end to the list. Everything needs doing. The cabin needs a real door and windows and a floor. The land needs clearing. Trees need cutting for timber and firewood. Rocks need moving. Garden space needs preparing before winter. It's September 1st. First hard frost comes in October, maybe. November, certainly. They have 2 months to prepare for winter. 2 months to make this livable. 2 months to figure out how to survive on land that looks like punishment. Rose is still sleeping, curled in blankets in the corner of the cabin, 7 years old and exhausted from 6 weeks of travel. She needs school, needs normalcy, needs childhood. But childhood is a luxury they can't afford right now. Right now she needs to help carry water and move rocks and learn that survival comes before comfort. Laura steps outside. The September morning is cool, different from Dakota cool. This is humid cool. The air has weight, has moisture. Her dress feels damp even though it's not raining. This is what 45 inches of annual rainfall feels like. This is what the pamphlets promised. The spring sits in a ravine about 200 yards from the cabin. Limestone outcroppings, clear water bubbling up from underground, cold enough to hurt your teeth. Almanzo is standing beside it with a bucket testing the flow. Seems reliable, he says when Laura approaches. Flows strong, even in what looks like dry season. That's good news, possibly the only good news available. Reliable water means survival is possible. Everything else, tools, skills, labour, can maybe compensate for the rocks and thin soil. But without water, nothing else matters. How much land can we clear before winter, Laura asks. Almanzo calculates. She can see him doing the math. His physical limitations, the density of the timber, the volume of rocks. Maybe a 1/4 acre if we work full days, maybe 1/2 acre if we hire help, which we can't afford. 1/4 acre, that's 60 feet by 60 feet, space for a small garden, maybe some chickens, not enough for serious farming, not enough to generate income, just enough to keep them alive through winter if they're lucky. Then we clear a 1/4 acre, Laura says. Plant a garden next spring, build up from there. It's not a good plan, it's barely a plan at all, but it's what they have. They spend the day assessing, walking the property line to line. 40 acres sounds like a lot until you're standing on it looking at how much work it represents. Every tree is a day of soaring. Every rock pile is a week of moving stones. Every square foot of soil needs clearing before it can produce anything. By evening, Laura has a mental inventory. 40 mature oak trees worth cutting for timber. Maybe 60 smaller trees that can be cleared for space, approximately 10,000 rocks visible on the surface. God knows how many more underground. The 400 apple seedlings are real, planted in rows, young, maybe 3 years old. They'll bear fruit in another 3 to 5 years if they survive. 3 to 5 years. That's how long until the apples provide income. 3 to 5 years of surviving on whatever they can grow, and whatever work they can find, and the slow process of building something from nothing. Rose asks the question neither adult wants to answer. When do I start school? Laura looks at Almanzo. Almanzo looks at Laura. School means Rose leaving the property daily, means walking 4 miles to town, means time not spent helping, but it also means education, means normalcy, means Rose has a chance at a life better than endless labour on rocky hillside. Monday, Laura says. You start Monday. We'll figure out the walking. That night they eat cornbread and beans cooked over an open fire outside the cabin. The cabin has no fireplace, no stove, just the dirt floor and log walls and leaking roof. They'll fix that, eventually, after everything else. After the door and windows and clearing space and surviving winter, they sleep in the cabin anyway. Because it's theirs. Because after 9 years of renting and failing and saving, they finally own something. Even if that something is a one-room log cabin with a dirt floor on 40 acres of rocks. It's more than they had yesterday. Less than they need tomorrow. But it's a start. Missouri. Rocky Ridge Farm. Home. For better or worse. Until success or death. September 2nd. Laura wakes to discover that owning land doesn't actually solve any problems. It just gives you a specific location where problems happen. The cabin measures 12 feet by 14 feet. That's 168 square feet of living space for 3 people. Do the math. 56 square feet per person. That's smaller than most prison cells, though at least prison cells have floors that aren't made of dirt. The arithmetic of survival is simple and brutal. They own 40 acres. They have $18 left after the down payment. Winter comes in October. That's 8 weeks to make this property livable enough that they don't freeze to death in a log box with no windows. Almanzo spends the morning walking the property, making calculations. How many trees need cutting for firewood? How many rocks need moving to create garden space? How much timber they can sell to generate cash? Every calculation leads to the same conclusion. There's too much work and not enough time. Laura watches him from the cabin doorway. Watches him walk slowly, favouring his weaker leg. Watches him measure distances and examine soil and count trees. Knows what he's thinking. Knows that every tree he identifies as needing removal represents days of work for a man who can't work full days anymore. She's doing her own calculations. $18 won't last until spring. They need income. Need it immediately. Need it continuously. The question isn't whether she'll work. It's what work exists 4 miles from Mansfield on a hillside covered in rocks. Rose asks the question neither adult wants to address. What are we eating today? Good question. They have cornmeal, some dried beans, a bit of bacon that's mostly salt. The food they brought from Dakota is nearly gone. The garden won't exist until spring. The chickens they plan to buy require money they don't have. Beans, Laura says. Same as yesterday, same as tomorrow until we figure something else out. Rose nods. 7 years old and already learning that owning land doesn't mean owning food. That property and poverty can exist simultaneously. That her parents saved 2 years to reach a place where they still can't afford to eat properly. By noon, Almanzo has his plan. Start clearing the quarter-acre closest to the cabin. Sell some timber in town. Use that money to buy chickens and a milk cow. Use chicken eggs for income and food. Clear more land gradually. Plant garden in spring. Survive until the apple trees start bearing fruit in 3 to 5 years. It's not a good plan. It's barely a plan at all, but it's what they have. He explains it to Laura that evening over beans cooked in the cast iron pot over an outdoor fire because the cabin has no stove. She listens, doesn't interrupt, lets him finish before she states the obvious. We need cash before any of that generates income. I need work in town. Almanzo doesn't argue. Can't argue. The numbers don't lie. A dozen eggs might sell for 10 cents. A gallon of milk for 15 cents. That's 25 cents per day if they're lucky, and the chickens cooperate and the cow doesn't die, and someone in Mansfield wants to buy dairy products from strangers living on a rock pile. Laura can make 25 cents sewing for a full day, maybe 50 cents if she's fast and the client is desperate. It's not prosperity, but it's immediate income while the chickens grow old enough to lay and the cow gets pregnant and produces milk. I'll walk to town tomorrow, she says. Ask around, someone needs sewing. 4 miles each way, 8 miles total, 2 hours of walking to reach potential work, 2 hours walking home, then whatever hours the sewing takes. Call it 12 hours of labour minimum to earn maybe 25 cents. Almanzo starts to protest, stops, does the math. 12 hours of his labour clearing land generates 0 immediate income. 12 hours of Laura's labour might generate 25 cents. 25 cents buys 5 pounds of cornmeal. 5 pounds of cornmeal feeds them for 2 days. I'll start clearing while you're gone, he says instead. Rose asks the question that's been bothering her since they arrived. When do I start school? Monday. The Mansfield school is 4 miles away. Same direction as town. Rose will walk with Laura, attend school, walk home alone in the afternoon. 4 miles each way for a 7-year-old. 8 miles daily. You'll get strong legs, Laura says, which is true but doesn't make the walking shorter or the distance less exhausting. That night they sleep in the cabin for the second time. The September air is still warm. The lack of windows doesn't matter yet. But October is 3 weeks away, November 6 weeks, December 9 weeks. The cabin needs a door, needs window covers, needs something resembling insulation because Missouri winter might be milder than Dakota, but cold is still cold when you're sleeping on dirt in a log box. Laura lies awake calculating. $18, minus food costs, minus materials for a door, minus nails, minus cloth for window coverings, minus chicken purchase, minus cow purchase if they can even afford a cow, minus. The money disappears before she can spend it. She saved for 2 years, worked every day, stitched until her fingers ached and her eyes blurred and her back screamed, saved $118, spent $100 on land. Now she's lying on a dirt floor in a cabin that barely qualifies as shelter, calculating whether she can afford to eat tomorrow. This is what success looks like when you're poor. This is what property ownership means when the property is 40 acres of rocks. This is what the land of the big red apple promised. Hard work and hope and the distinct possibility of failure. Welcome to Rocky Ridge Farm. Where the ridge is rocky and the farm is theoretical, and the only thing that's certain is that tomorrow requires more work than today and pays exactly the same. Nothing. Unless Laura can find someone in Mansfield who needs a dress. September 5th. Almanzo swings an axe for the first time in 6 years. His arms remember the motion. His body doesn't. The tree is maybe 40 years old. Oak, 8 inches diameter. Should take an hour to fell. Takes him 3. Not because he's forgotten how to use an axe. Because his legs won't cooperate. Because balance is half of axe work and his stroke damaged his balance permanently. Because every swing requires planting his feet and his feet don't trust him anymore. The tree falls eventually, crashes through brush and lands among rocks. Now it needs cutting into lengths, needs splitting, needs stacking. That's another day of work. Maybe 2 days. Maybe 3 for a man who can work maybe 4 hours before his leg gives out entirely. He sits on a stump and does the mathematics. 1/4 acre needs clearing. That's maybe 40 trees this size, plus undergrowth, plus rocks, plus root systems. At 3 days per tree, that's 120 days of work. 4 months, and that's just for 1/4 acre, just for the space needed for garden. The apple trees won't produce for 3 years minimum. Maybe 5. That's 3 to 5 years of clearing and planting and working and hoping. 3 to 5 years of living on whatever Laura can earn and whatever eggs chickens provide and whatever vegetables grow in rocky Missouri soil. He was 35 when the stroke happened, 37 when they returned to Smet, 39 now. Add 5 years and he'll be 44. Middle-aged by frontier standards, old by the standards of men who've worked physical labour their entire lives. What happens if his leg gets worse? What happens if another stroke comes? What happens if the 5 years become 10 years because the trees don't produce on schedule? What happens if this entire gamble fails and they're 50 years old and broke and living in a cabin made of logs? He doesn't have answers. Just an axe and 40 acres of trees and the absolute certainty that stopping isn't optional. They put everything into this property. There's no backup plan, no family to return to, no Dakota to retreat to. This is it. Rocky Ridge or death, success or destruction, no middle ground. By noon he's managed to trim branches off the fallen tree. His shirt is soaked with sweat. His leg is trembling. His back is screaming. He's 44 years old in spirit, if not in years. Laura returns in late afternoon, 4 miles from town. She's been walking since dawn, 8 miles today, 16 tomorrow when she walks Rose to school and herself to work and then reverses the journey in the evening. Found work, she says. Mrs. Cooley needs a dress, offered 25 cents. 25 cents. 1 day of labour. Enough to buy 5 pounds of cornmeal or 3 pounds of beans or 2 pounds of bacon. Enough to eat for 2 days if they're careful. Not enough to buy chickens or a cow or materials for a door or any of the 1,000 things they need. But it's something. It's income. It's proof that Mansfield has people who wear clothes and occasionally need new ones and are willing to pay strangers on rock farms to sew them. She looks at the fallen tree, at the pile of branches, at Almanzo sitting on a stump looking exhausted. Does the calculation. 1 tree, 3 days, 40 trees, 120 days, 4 months for 1/4 acre. We need help, she says. Can't afford help. Can't afford not to. You can't clear this alone. Not before winter, not ever. She's right. He knows she's right, but hiring help costs money they don't have. A labourer wants maybe $1 per day. 5 days of hired help equals $5 equals 1 week of Laura's sewing income. It's money they can't spare, unless they can't spare not to spend it. I'll ask in town, Laura says. See if anyone needs occasional work. Maybe someone will work for partial cash and partial trade. Trade what? They don't have anything to trade. No excess food, no livestock, no goods. Just 40 acres of rocks and trees and optimism wearing thin. But she'll ask anyway. Because the alternative is watching Almanzo kill himself trying to clear land he physically cannot clear alone. Because the arithmetic of survival sometimes requires spending money you don't have to create value that doesn't exist yet. Rose returns from exploring the property. She's found the spring. Found the ravine where water bubbles up cold and clear and constant. Found the one thing about this property that actually works as advertised. Water that doesn't quit. Can we get fish? She asks. The spring looks like it could have fish. Laura doesn't know. Doesn't know if springs have fish. Doesn't know if Missouri fish are edible. Doesn't know anything except that her daughter is 7 years old and asking about fish, because fish means food, and food means not being hungry, and not being hungry is apparently too much to ask after 2 years of saving. We'll check, she says, because maybe is better than no, and hope is cheaper than fish. That night, Almanzo cooks beans over the outdoor fire while Laura mends the tear in his work shirt. Rose practices reading by firelight. They're pioneer farmers building a life on Missouri hillside. They're a family in a one-room cabin with a dirt floor and no prospects. They're survivors who spent everything to reach a place where survival is all they can afford. The first tree is down, 39 more to go, just for the first 1/4 acre, just for the beginning of something that might eventually resemble a farm. Tomorrow Laura walks 8 miles to sew a dress for 25 cents. Tomorrow Almanzo cuts another tree and tries not to think about the mathematics of 40 acres divided by the capacity of damaged legs. Tomorrow Rose walks 4 miles to school because education is the thing they refuse to sacrifice, even when everything else is negotiable. Tomorrow, and the day after. And the day after that. Until the land is cleared or they're dead or some combination of both that counts as success in the arithmetic of frontier poverty. October 10th, first frost. The morning air bites skin and turns breath visible. Laura wakes in the cabin and knows that time is running out. They've been here 6 weeks. Almanzo has cleared maybe 1/10 of the 1/4 acre. 3 trees down, cut, split, stacked. That's progress. But it's not enough progress. Winter is coming and they're living in a log box with no door and no windows and no heat source except an outdoor fire that works until it rains. Laura has walked to Mansfield 14 times, sewn 7 dresses, earned maybe $2 total. $2. That's 40 days of having $18, minus food costs, minus materials, costs minus the cost of being alive. They now own 4 chickens. Scrawny birds purchased from a farmer for 50 cents each. $2 invested in future eggs that don't exist yet because the chickens are young and stressed and living in a shelter. Almanzo built from scrap lumber. No cow. Can't afford a cow. A decent milk cow costs $15 to $20. That's 10 weeks of Laura's sewing income. That's more money than they've seen in one place since they spent $100 on this property. Rose has been walking to school daily, 4 miles each way, 8 miles per day, 5 days per week, 40 miles weekly for a 7-year-old. She's getting strong legs. She's also getting tired. Laura sees it in her face when she returns each afternoon, sees the exhaustion, sees the way Rose doesn't complain because complaining doesn't make distance shorter. The cabin needs a door, needs it desperately. The cloth hanging across the entrance blocks may be 30% of wind and 0% of animals. They've woken twice to find raccoons inside investigating food supplies, once to a skunk. The skunk was worse than the raccoons. Almanzo spends 2 days building a door, uses timber from the cleared trees, hangs it on leather hinges because metal hinges cost money. It's not a good door, but it's a door. It closes. It keeps most animals out. That counts as success. Windows need covering. He stretches cloth across the window opening, tacks it down. It's not glass. It's not even particularly effective, but it keeps some wind out. That's improvement. The cabin is now a sealed box with a dirt floor and no heat source. That's a problem. Cooking outside works when it's warm. Doesn't work when it's freezing. They need a stove or a fireplace. Preferably both. Have neither. Can't afford either. Almanzo makes a decision that's part practical and part desperate. He builds a fire pit inside the cabin, digs a shallow depression in the dirt floor, lines it with rocks, cuts a hole in the roof for smoke. It's not safe. It's not efficient. But it's heat. Kind of. The first fire fills the cabin with smoke. The hole in the roof is too small. Smoke hangs at head level. They crouch on the floor, breathing air that doesn't quite strangle them. Laura's eyes water. Rose coughs. Almanzo enlarges the roof hole. Second attempt works better. Smoke mostly exits through the roof. Some heat stays in the cabin. They can cook inside now. Can heat the space minimally. Can survive winter in a 12 by 14 foot log box with a dirt floor and a fire pit, and absolutely no margin for error. By mid-October they've developed routines. Laura walks to town Monday, Wednesday, Friday seeking sewing work. Almanzo clears land on days he has strength. Rose walks to school daily unless weather is too dangerous. They eat beans and cornmeal and occasional eggs when the chickens cooperate. The chickens lay maybe 3 eggs per week, total. That's not enough to sell, not enough to eat regularly. Just enough to remind them that chickens exist and sometimes produce food, and other times produce nothing but expense and disappointment. Laura starts taking in laundry. Mrs. Cooley mentions it, says her sister needs someone to wash sheets, offers 15 cents per load. 15 cents. That's 3 hours of hauling water from the spring and heating it over fire and scrubbing cloth and hanging it to dry and hoping it dries before she needs to return it. She takes the work anyway. Because 15 cents is 15 cents. Because pride is expensive and poverty doesn't care about dignity. By month end, she's washing laundry twice weekly. Sewing when work exists. Walking 8 miles minimum per trip. Working maybe 60 hours per week for maybe $1 total. Almanzo has cleared 5 trees, has cut them into firewood, has stacked the wood near the cabin. 5 trees. That's firewood for maybe 2 months if they're careful. If winter is mild. If they don't freeze to death in a cabin heated by a fire pit that might or might not keep them alive. Rose asks a question neither parent wants to answer. Are we going to be okay? Laura doesn't know. Can't know. The mathematics are too tight. The margin too thin. They own 40 acres but barely own their next meal. They have a cabin but it's barely shelter. They have plans, but plans require time and money and luck, and all 3 are in short supply. We're going to work hard, Laura says instead, and hope that's enough. It's not an answer. It's a prayer disguised as a statement. It's what you say when the truth is too uncertain to speak aloud. It's the frontier ethic reduced to its core. Work and hope. Hope and work. And try not to calculate the odds, because the odds are terrible. October ends, November arrives. The temperature drops. The fire pit keeps them from freezing. Barely. They sleep in their clothes under every blanket they own. Wake to frost inside the cabin. To ice in the water bucket. To the knowledge that winter is just beginning and they're already exhausted. This is the cost of 40 acres. This is what property ownership means when you're poor. This is the price of the land of the big red apple. Work until you collapse. Sleep in cold. Wake and do it again. And somehow, impossibly, survive until spring. November 3rd. First hard freeze. Laura wakes to discover that Missouri winter is different from Dakota winter, but winter is still winter when you're sleeping in a log box. The difference is deceptive. Dakota cold was honest, brutal and clear, 30 below zero, and you knew exactly what you were facing. Missouri cold is sneaky. 20 degrees feels warm by comparison, until you realize the cabin has no insulation, and the humidity makes cold sink into bones differently. The fire pit Almanzo built keeps them from freezing. Barely. They wake to frost on the inside walls, to ice in the water bucket, to the knowledge that the chickens probably won't lay eggs again until spring, and that's 4 months of no egg income and no protein except whatever beans they can afford. Rose asks the question that's been bothering her for weeks. Why is it colder inside than outside? Good question. The cabin has no chinking between logs. Wind blows straight through gaps. The cloth over the window opening flaps uselessly. The door fits poorly. Heat from the fire pit rises straight through the hole in the roof that's supposed to be a chimney but is actually just a hole. Physics, Laura says. Which is true but doesn't make anyone warmer. They've been here 2 months. 60 days of owning 40 acres. 60 days of learning that property ownership solves exactly 0 problems related to cold or hunger, or the question of how to survive until spring on $18, minus food costs, minus everything they've already spent. Almanzo has cleared maybe 1/10 of the quarter acre. 4 trees down, cut, split, stacked. That's firewood for maybe 6 weeks if they're careful. If they don't freeze to death first, if the wood is actually dry enough to burn, which some of it isn't because green wood doesn't cure instantly just because you need it to. He needs help. Can't clear land alone. Can't afford help. That's the arithmetic that keeps both of them awake at night, calculating impossible numbers. A day labourer costs $1. They have maybe $12 left. 12 days of hired help to clear land that needs months of work. Unless... Laura makes the calculation she's been avoiding. She can work in Mansfield, sewing, laundry, whatever pays. 8 miles round trip, 16 miles if she walks Rose to school and herself to town and back twice. Call it 6 hours of walking per day to reach work that might pay 25 cents. The mathematics are terrible. But the mathematics of freezing to death are worse. I'll ask in town Monday, she says. Someone needs sewing. Someone always needs sewing. Almanzo doesn't argue. Can't argue. The numbers don't lie. His labour clearing land generates 0 immediate income. Her labour might generate quarters that buy cornmeal that keeps them alive another week. They've reached the point where a quarter is the difference between eating and not eating. Where walking 6 hours to earn 25 cents makes economic sense because the alternative is starvation with dignity. Rose has been walking to school daily, 4 miles each way. 8 miles per day in weather that's getting progressively colder. She's 7 years old and walking 16 miles per week through November cold, because education is the thing they refuse to sacrifice, even when everything else is negotiable. She comes home exhausted. Laura sees it. Sees the way Rose doesn't complain, because complaining doesn't make distance shorter or cold warmer, or poverty less poor. Sees her daughter becoming what frontier life creates. Hard, enduring, old before her time. By mid-November they've developed winter routines, wake at dawn, build up fire, eat cornmeal mush if they have cornmeal. Almanzo works on clearing when weather permits. Laura walks to town when work exists. Rose walks to school unless ice or snow makes the road impassable. They eat beans, cornmeal, occasional eggs when the chickens cooperate, which is never, because chickens don't lay in winter. They're hungry. Not starving, but hungry in the way that makes you think about food constantly. That makes you calculate how many more meals the current supplies will provide. That makes you understand why people in the past spent so much time obsessing about harvest. The cabin is 168 square feet, 12 by 14. That's 56 square feet per person. You can't escape each other, can't have privacy, can't have a bad mood without everyone participating in it, can't have space. They sleep in their clothes, under every blanket they own, wake to each other's breath visible in cold air. To the reality that this is what success looks like when you're poor. This is what property ownership means when the property is 40 acres of rocks and you're living in a log box heated by a fire pit. Laura lies awake calculating. $12 remaining, minus food, minus materials if anything breaks, minus any emergency. The money disappears before she can spend it. Again, same mathematics as October, same impossible arithmetic. They saved 2 years, worked every day, spent $100 on 40 acres of rocks. Now they're lying in cold darkness calculating whether they can afford to eat tomorrow. Calculating whether walking 6 hours to earn a quarter makes sense. Calculating whether they'll survive winter. This is Missouri, the land of the big red apple, the place promotional literature promised would be different, better, easier. The literature lied. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe this is exactly what frontier success looks like. Cold, hungry, poor, alive, barely. November ends, December arrives. The cold deepens, the woodpile shrinks, the money disappears, the hunger continues. Welcome to winter at Rocky Ridge Farm, where the ridge is rocky and the farm is theoretical, and the only thing certain is that spring is 4 months away, and 4 months is forever when you're cold and hungry and calculating whether you'll survive to see it. December 15th. Laura walks to Mansfield in snow, 4 miles, 2 hours, arrives at Mrs. Cooley's house to sew curtains for 15 cents. 15 cents. 3 hours of sewing, 6 hours of walking round trip, 9 hours total to earn enough to buy 3 pounds of cornmeal, or 2 pounds of beans, or 1 pound of bacon. She takes the work, because 15 cents is 15 cents, because pride is expensive and poverty doesn't negotiate, because her family needs to eat and equations don't care about dignity. Mrs. Cooley is kind, offers hot tea, doesn't mention that Laura's dress is worn or her shoes are splitting or her hands are chapped raw from cold and work. Treats her like a professional, providing a service rather than a desperate woman walking 4 miles in snow for pocket change. Laura appreciates this more than the 15 cents. She sews for 3 hours, makes curtains from cloth Mrs. Cooley provides, does good work, professional work, the kind of stitching that won't unravel in 6 months, takes pride in the work even though the pay is insulting and the walk was brutal and her feet are numb with cold. The walk home is harder. Afternoon. Temperature dropping. 4 miles feels longer when you're tired and carrying 15 cents that represents 9 hours of labour, and knowing you'll do it again tomorrow if work exists. Rose is home when Laura arrives. Has walked back from school alone, 4 miles, 7 years old. Has started a fire in the pit. Has attempted to cook something that might be beans or might be a disaster Laura's too tired to identify. Made dinner, Rose says proudly. Laura looks at the pot, looks at her daughter. 7 years old and cooking because her mother is walking 8 miles to earn 15 cents. 7 years old and managing fire and food because poverty requires children to be adults before they're ready. Thank you, Laura says, means it. Eats whatever is in the pot because food is food and her daughter tried and that matters more than whether the beans are cooked correctly. Almanzo returns at dark, has been trying to clear more land, has managed maybe half a tree. His leg is bothering him worse. The cold makes it ache. The labour aggravates old damage. He's 40 years old and moving like 60. They eat. Don't talk much. Too tired for conversation. Too cold for anything except eating and sleeping and preparing to do it again tomorrow. That night Almanzo makes a decision that's part practical and part desperate. They need help. Can't afford it, but can't afford not to have it. He'll ask around town, see if anyone wants occasional work in exchange for partial cash and partial promise of payment later, when the farm produces income that doesn't exist yet. It's not a good plan. It's asking someone to work on credit when you're broke and own 40 acres of rocks. But it's what they have. By December 20th, he's found someone. A young man, maybe 18, needs work. Willing to take 50 cents per day now and 50 cents per day later when the Wilders can afford to pay the rest. It's exploitative. It's also mutual desperation. The young man needs any income. The Wilders need help or they won't survive to pay anyone anything. They shake on it. Start work December 21st. The shortest day of the year. The beginning of winter getting lighter. But winter is still winter, and light doesn't mean warm. The young man, whose name Laura doesn't record anywhere, works hard. Young enough that his body doesn't quit after 4 hours. Strong enough to swing an axe all day. Desperate enough to work for half wages on promise of eventual payment from people who might not survive to make good on promises. Together, he and Almanzo clear 2 trees per day. That's progress. Real progress. The kind that makes the quarter-acre goal seem achievable rather than impossible. The kind that means spring garden becomes reality rather than fantasy. But it costs 50 cents per day. That's 15 days of Laura's curtain sewing earnings. That's 50 days of their remaining money. The mathematics are getting tighter. Laura finds more work. Mrs. Cooley's sister needs laundry. Offers 20 cents per load. 20 cents. That's hauling water from the spring. Heating it over fire, scrubbing sheets and clothes until her hands bleed, wringing out heavy wet fabric. Hanging it to dry in December cold where it freezes solid, and has to be brought inside to thaw before it can actually dry. She takes the work. By Christmas, they've been in Missouri 4 months. They own 40 acres. They live in a one-room cabin with a dirt floor and a fire pit. They employ a young man at half wages on credit. They eat beans and cornmeal. They're cold and hungry and working harder than humans should have to work just to stay alive. Christmas Day is December 25th. They don't celebrate, can't afford celebration, can't afford anything except survival. Rose gets no gifts. They eat beans. They work. Same as every other day, except Rose doesn't walk to school because school is closed. Laura thinks about Christmases past, about De Smet, about her parents and sisters, about the years when Christmas meant family and food and something approaching joy, about how far away that life feels now. They made choices, saved 2 years, bought property, moved to Missouri, executed a plan that was supposed to lead to success. And here they are, cold, hungry, poor, working themselves to exhaustion for 15 cents per day, and the privilege of owning 40 acres of rocks they can't afford to improve. Was it worth it? She doesn't know. Can't know. Won't know until spring. Until the garden grows. Until the chickens lay. Until the apple trees bear fruit in 3 to 5 years, if they survive that long. All she knows is that stopping isn't optional. Giving up means losing everything. Means 2 years of saving was wasted. Means 40 acres of rocks becomes 40 acres of rocks owned by the bank. Means failure. Again. So they don't stop. They wake up, they work, they eat beans, they freeze, they walk miles for cents, they hire help they can't afford, they make decisions that barely qualify as decisions because there's only one choice: survive or die trying. December ends. The year 1894 becomes 1895. New year, same poverty, same cold, same arithmetic of survival, but they're alive. Still, barely. But alive counts as success when the alternative is death. March 10th, 1895. First warm day. Temperature hits 50 degrees and feels like paradise after 4 months of winter. Laura stands outside the cabin assessing. They survived. Barely. But survived. The young man cleared maybe a third of the quarter acre before winter made work impossible. Almanzo's still alive. Rose is still alive. The chickens survived. Nobody died. That counts as success. Now comes the next impossible task. They need more space. The cabin is 168 square feet. They've lived in it for 6 months. 6 months of no privacy. No space. No room to think or breathe or exist separately. 6 months of sleeping 3 people in a space meant for maybe one person who hates themselves. They need expansion. Need it desperately. Can't afford it. Story of their lives. But Almanzo makes calculations. They have timber. Have the trees they cleared. Can mill some of it. Can trade some timber for milling services. Can build a second room attached to the existing cabin. Maybe 12 by 12. That would double their living space, would give Rose her own sleeping area, would make life almost bearable. He presents the plan to Laura. She listens. Does her own calculations. Building requires time. Time means Almanzo isn't clearing more land, isn't generating future garden space. But current living conditions are crushing them. The cabin is destroying their sanity. Build it, she says, so he does. Starts in March. Uses the cleared timber, oak, good strong wood, heavy. Almanzo can't lift the large pieces alone. The young man helps. They're still paying him 50 cents per day on credit. The debt grows, but the room grows too. They stake out 12 feet by 12 feet, level the ground, lay stone foundation. The rocks they've been cursing for 6 months finally prove useful. Foundation material, free, abundant, heavy as hell, but free. By April they have walls going up, log construction, same as the original cabin, gaps between logs that will need chinking. Almanzo mixes mud and grass and whatever else makes primitive mortar, packs it between logs. It's not professional, but it's better than wind blowing straight through. Rose helps. 7 years old and carrying water, mixing mud, handing tools, doing whatever a 7-year-old can do. Learning that family survival means everyone works, that childhood is a luxury they can't afford, that hard work is the price of existence. Laura continues walking to town, sewing, laundry, whatever pays. The income is still critical, still the difference between eating and not eating, but now it's also paying the young man's wages, paying for nails when nails are needed, paying for supplies they can't make themselves. By May, the second room has walls and a roof, actual roof. Not perfect, but better than a hole with cloth stretched across it. The room is maybe 80% complete, needs a door connecting to the original cabin, needs window opening, needs finishing work, but it's space, new space, additional space. Rose moves into the new room, gets her own sleeping area, privacy. First time in 6 months she's had space that isn't shared with adults every second of every day. She cries, actually cries, 7 years old and crying because she has a room, because she has space. Because poverty is so crushing that 12 feet by 12 feet of additional living space feels like wealth. Laura understands. The cabin was breaking them, was crushing them into resentment and frustration, and the kind of madness that happens when humans have no space to be human. The second room isn't luxury, but it's survival. The total living space is now approximately 312 square feet. Original cabin 168. New room 144, that's 104 square feet per person, almost twice what they had, almost enough to feel human. The garden goes in late April, quarter-acre cleared, ploughed, planted. Almanzo does the work. His leg screams. He ignores it. Plants corn, beans, squash, potatoes, cabbage. Everything that might grow in rocky Missouri soil. The chickens start laying again. Spring warmth triggers biological imperatives. 3 chickens laying maybe 8 eggs per week total. That's income. That's protein. That's the difference between surviving and thriving, which is still pretty close to surviving but marginally better. Laura sells eggs in town, 10 cents per dozen. 8 eggs isn't a dozen, but she sells them anyway. Gets maybe 7 cents. That's 2 pounds of flour. 2 pounds of flour makes bread for 3 days. Math matters. By late May, they've been in Missouri 8 months. They own 40 acres. They live in a 1.5-room cabin. They've cleared maybe 1/3 of a quarter acre. They planted a garden that might or might not produce. They employ help they can't afford to pay fully. They owe money to the bank. They owe money to the young man. They owe money to existence. But they're alive. The cabin is bigger. The garden is planted. The chickens are laying. Spring is here. Almanzo assesses the apple trees, the 400 seedlings that came with the property. Most survived winter. Maybe 350 trees still living. Young, maybe 3 to 5 years from bearing fruit. Maybe longer if conditions are bad. 3 to 5 years. That's how long until the apples provide real income. That's how long they have to survive on eggs and garden vegetables and whatever Laura can earn walking to town sewing curtains for 15 cents. 3 to 5 years, forever. An impossible distance when you're measuring survival in weeks. Laura stands in the new room, looks at the space, thinks about the year. August 1894 to May 1895. 9 months. They survived. Built shelter, cleared land, planted garden, didn't die. That's success when you're poor. Not comfort, not prosperity, just not dying, just surviving another season, just making it to tomorrow. She's 28 years old, feels 50, has worked every day for 9 months. Sewing, laundry, hauling water, managing household, managing poverty, managing survival, and she'll do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, for 3 to 5 years until the apples bear fruit, for however long it takes to transform 40 acres of rocks into a farm that actually produces something worth selling, because stopping isn't optional, because they own this land, because they spent 2 years saving for the privilege of owning 40 acres and the right to work themselves to death trying to make it productive. Welcome to spring at Rocky Ridge Farm, where the ridge is rocky and the farm is slowly becoming real, and the only thing certain is that tomorrow requires more work than today, and tomorrow never ends. But they have a second room now. That's progress. Barely, but progress. June 1895. Laura stands in the garden plot and calculates. 1/4 acre cleared, planted, growing, maybe. The corn is 3 inches tall, should be 6 by now. Rocky Missouri soil doesn't release nutrients like Dakota prairie. The plants struggle, grow slowly, produce maybe half what Dakota soil would yield if Dakota had water, which it didn't, which is why they left. This is progress. Slow progress. Painful progress. But progress. The second room is finished. Rose has her own space. The family has 312 square feet instead of 168. That's doubled living space in 9 months. That's achievement measured in lumber and sweat, and Almanzo's aching leg and money they didn't have but spent anyway because staying in one room was killing them. They've been in Missouri 10 months, own 40 acres, live in a 1.5 room cabin, cleared maybe half an acre total. Planted garden on a 1/4 acre, employ occasional help they can barely afford, owe money to the bank, owe money to everyone, but the corn is 3 inches tall. That's something. Almanzo has a plan, always has a plan. Plans are cheap, execution costs everything. His current plan involves clearing another 1/4 acre by fall, planting winter wheat, buying a milk cow if they can afford it, which they can't, expanding the chicken flock, building a proper barn. All of this requiring time and money and physical capacity he doesn't quite have. Laura listens to the plans, doesn't argue. Arguing costs energy better spent on actual work. Instead, she does her own calculations. The chickens are laying maybe 10 eggs per week now. That's almost enough to sell. 10 cents per dozen, but they don't have a dozen. 7 cents for 10 eggs. That's 1 pound of flour, or 1/2 pound of bacon, or 1/4 pound of coffee if they're feeling wealthy, which they're not. She's still doing laundry in town. Mrs. Cooley's sister, 20 cents per load, 1 load per week, 80 cents per month. That's 8 pounds of flour or 6 pounds of bacon or survival for 2 days, depending on how you calculate. The seamstress work saved them, bought this land, got them here. Now they're here, and the arithmetic is exactly the same. Work for cents, calculate survival in pounds, hope tomorrow is slightly less terrible than today. Rose is 8 years old, walking 4 miles to school, walking 4 miles home, learning reading and arithmetic and how to exist in a world that requires constant labour just to stay alive. She doesn't complain, has learned that complaining doesn't change mathematics. Doesn't make distance shorter or poverty less poor or parents less exhausted. By July the corn is 6 inches tall, the beans are flowering, the squash is spreading, the potatoes are growing underground where you can't see them but you trust they're there because what else can you do except trust that underground things are happening. This is farming, trust and work and hope, mostly work. Almanzo clears another tree, then another. The 1/4 acre expansion is happening, slowly, 1 tree at a time, each tree representing days of labour, days of pain, days of believing that 40 acres of rocks can become something that produces income that pays the mortgage, that keeps them from losing everything again. They've lost everything before. Dakota, the baby, the house. Almanzo's health, everything except each other. They're not losing this. Not after 2 years of seamstress work saved them. not after walking 650 miles, not after surviving first winter in a cabin with no windows. This land is theirs. 40 acres. Rocky. Difficult. Theirs. By August, the garden is producing. Not abundantly, not impressively. But producing. Beans, some corn. Squash that's more seeds than flesh, but it's food. They eat vegetables. First time in months they're eating something they grew instead of something they bought with quarters earned walking 8 miles. The apple trees are growing. 350 trees still alive. Young. Years away from bearing fruit. But alive. Growing. Future income that doesn't exist yet, but might. Hope measured in saplings. Laura turns 29 in February 1896, feels 40, has worked every day for 4 years. Smet Seamstress. Missouri laundry, garden, chickens, household, survival. No breaks, no rest. Just work that never quite accomplishes enough to feel secure. But the corn was 6 inches in July, 10 inches in August, 4 feet by September, produced ears, small ears, hard kernels, but corn. Food they grew, achievement. Almanzo turns 40 in February 1896. His leg is worse. The cold makes it ache constantly. The labour aggravates old damage. He moves slower, works less. Accomplishes maybe half what he could 10 years ago, but half of something beats all of nothing. They buy a milk cow in spring 1896. Cost $15. $15 they saved by Laura washing laundry and selling eggs and Almanzo selling firewood he cut from cleared trees. $15 that represents months of labour for an animal that might produce income. Might die, might get sick, might be the best decision they make or the worst. The cow produces milk, 2 gallons per day. They drink some, sell some, make butter, sell that. Income. Actual ongoing income from an asset they own. Not wage labour. Not working for others. Income from property. This is the goal. This is what 40 acres was supposed to mean. Assets that produce income without daily wage labour. They're not there yet. Still need Laura's laundry money. Still need Almanzo's firewood sales. Still need every penny, but the cow helps. By end of 1896, they've been in Missouri 2 years. Cleared maybe 3/4 of an acre. Built second room. Bought cow. Expanded chicken flock to 8 birds. Planted 2 gardens. Survived 2 winters. Haven't lost the land. That's success when you're poor. Not prosperity, not comfort. Just not losing what you have. Just surviving another year. Just making it to tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow until eventually the apple trees bear fruit and maybe then things get easier. Maybe. But probably not, because easy isn't how this works. This works through labour and hope and calculation and accepting that progress is measured in inches when you need miles. The corn grew 6 inches to 4 feet. That's progress. That's what 2 years of seamstress work bought them. The chance to watch corn grow on land they own on 40 acres of rocks in Missouri. It's not much, but it's theirs. And after losing everything once, owning anything feels like wealth. 1897, 3rd year. The apple trees are still not producing. This is the problem with orchards. Plant trees. Wait years. Hope they don't die. Hope they eventually produce. Hope the market wants apples when they finally bear fruit. Hope is expensive when you're poor. The Wilders have 350 apple trees. Young trees. 3 years old when they bought the property. 6 years old now. Maybe 1 or 2 more years until first significant harvest. Maybe longer. Trees don't care about human timelines. Trees grow at tree speed. Meanwhile, they still need to eat. Laura has taken on more laundry work. 3 clients now. 60 cents per week total. That's $2.40 per month. That's survival for 1 week. That's the difference between eating and not eating, which is still the calculation 3 years after arriving. The milk cow is producing well. 2 gallons daily. They're selling maybe 1 gallon, keeping 1 for household, making butter twice weekly, selling butter for 15 cents per pound. Income, small income, but income from an asset, not from hourly labour. This is the transition they're attempting, from wage labour to asset income. From hours worked equals money to things owned produce money. It's slow, painfully slow, but it's happening. Almanzo has cleared a full acre now, planted wheat, winter wheat that grows during cool months, harvests in spring. First harvest is 1898. Yields maybe 10 bushels. Sells for 40 cents per bushel, $4 total, minus seed cost, minus labour. $4 for a year of work. This is why farmers fail. This is why half the country moved west and half of those moved back east. This is why the Wilders spent 2 years saving to reach a place where they work just as hard for just as little. But they own it. The land, the work, the harvest, all theirs. That ownership matters even when the profit doesn't. Rose is 10 years old, still walking to school, still helping with chickens and garden, still learning that life means work and work means survival, and survival is the only goal that matters. She's good in school, smart, reads everything, writes well. Laura sees herself in that, sees the girl she was before marriage and poverty, and seamstress work became her entire identity. Maybe Rose will have different options. Maybe education leads somewhere besides laundry and chicken eggs. Maybe. Laura doesn't voice this hope. Hope spoken aloud becomes expectation. Expectation becomes disappointment. Better to work and let futures reveal themselves. By 1898, they've been in Missouri 4 years. The cabin has been moved, relocated to better position on the property. Almanzo and hired help did this. Actual physical moving of log structure. Now it's positioned where the eventual permanent house will be built. Someday, when they can afford it. Which isn't now or soon or any time imaginable. The cabin has become 2 rooms plus a kitchen space. Sort of. It's still log construction, still primitive, but functional. Space enough to breathe. Space enough to not hate each other. Space enough to survive. The apple trees are 7 years old, still not producing significant fruit. Maybe next year. Always. Maybe next year. The weight is crushing. Every spring Laura looks at trees covered in blossoms and calculates if these produce. If we get good yield, if market price is decent, if everything goes right, then maybe we can pay down mortgage, maybe buy more livestock, maybe stop doing laundry for 20 cents per load. If, maybe, someday. The vocabulary of poverty and hope. Almanzo is 42. Laura is 31. They feel 20 years older. The work ages you. The poverty ages you. The constant calculation of whether you'll survive another month ages you faster than time. But they're still here. Still own 40 acres. Still haven't lost it. Still surviving. That counts. 1899, 5th year. The apple trees produce. Not abundantly. Not profitably. But they produce. Apples. Actual apples. Small. Not perfect. But edible and sellable and proof that 7 years of waiting wasn't wasted. First harvest yields maybe 20 bushels. Sells for $1 per bushel in Mansfield. $20. $20 from trees, from assets, from something that produces income without daily wage labour. It's not enough. $20 doesn't solve anything, doesn't pay mortgage, doesn't eliminate debt, doesn't mean Laura stops doing laundry. But it's proof. Proof that orchards work. Proof that waiting produces results. Proof that the plan might actually work someday. Almanzo immediately wants to expand. Buy adjacent land. Plant more trees. Scale up. This is how you get wealthy. Assets that produce income. More assets equals more income. Simple mathematics. Laura does different mathematics. They have 40 acres. Haven't paid off mortgage. Still owe bank, still barely surviving. Expansion means more debt, more risk, more ways to lose everything again. They don't expand. Not yet. First they survive. Then they think about growth. By 1900, they've been in Missouri 6 years. They've cleared 2 acres, built functional cabin, own 1 milk cow, 8 chickens, 350 apple trees that finally started producing. They've survived 6 winters, 6 years of poverty, 6 years of work. The mortgage is barely smaller. They've been making payments, $24 annually plus interest. But 40 acres cost $500, $400 on mortgage. At this rate, they'll pay it off in 17 more years. 1917, when Laura is 51 and Almanzo is 61, unless the apples produce more, unless they expand livestock, unless something changes the mathematics, unless luck becomes a factor for once instead of against them. Rose is 13, almost grown. Still in school, but talking about teaching, following her mother's path. Laura doesn't know how she feels about this. Teaching saved her. Teaching was the skill that mattered until seamstress work became the skill that mattered. Maybe Rose needs both. Maybe Rose needs neither. Maybe Rose finds a third path. The 20th century begins, 1900. Laura is 33, has been working since she was 14. 19 years of labour, teaching, seamstress, laundry, farm, garden, chickens, survival. Owns 40 acres of rocks in Missouri. Lives in a log cabin. Does laundry for 60 cents per week. Sells butter for 15 cents per pound. Watches apple trees finally start producing after 7 years of waiting. This is what 2 years of seamstress work bought. This is what $100 of saved money accomplished. 40 acres and 7 years of more work. 40 acres and the privilege of working yourself to death trying to make rocks produce income. But it's working. Slowly. Painfully. Barely. But working. The orchard is producing. The cow is producing, the chickens are producing, the assets are starting to generate income that might eventually exceed expenses. Someday. Maybe. If everything goes right. If nothing catastrophic happens. If they can just keep working and surviving and hoping long enough for the mathematics to finally work in their favour. The new century begins. The Wilders are still poor. Still working. Still surviving. But surviving counts as victory when you've lost everything before, and the apple trees are finally producing. That's something. That's hope measured in bushels. That's progress. 1901. Something shifts. Not dramatically, not obviously, but the mathematics start to change. The apple harvest is better. 40 bushels instead of 20. Sells for better price. $1.20 per bushel. $48. $48. That's 2 months of mortgage payments. That's survival for a month and a half. That's proof that orchards can produce real income, not just theoretical future income. Almanza wants to expand now. The adjacent 40 acres is available. Man selling for $400. Same terms. 100 down. Mortgage the rest. Double their land. Double the orchard potential. Double everything. Laura calculates differently. They still owe $350 on current land. Expansion means $750 in total debt. Means risk. Means everything could collapse again. Means Dakota. Means failure. Means losing everything. They argue. First real argument in years. Almanzo sees opportunity. Laura sees risk. Both are right. Opportunity is risk. Risk is opportunity. You can't have one without the other. They compromise. Save money. If next year's harvest is good, if the milk cow stays healthy, if nothing catastrophic happens, then maybe they consider expansion. 1902. Second harvest. 60 bushels. $1.20 per bushel. $72. They buy the adjacent 40 acres. August 1902. Another $100 down. Another $400 on mortgage. They now own 80 acres. Owe $700 on total debt. Have committed to decades more of mortgage payments and labour and hope. It's terrifying. It's also the only way forward. Can't stay static. Either grow or eventually fail. They choose growth. The adjacent 40 has fewer trees but better soil in places, less rocky. Almanzo starts clearing immediately, plants more apple trees, young saplings. These won't produce for 5 years. But 5 years is better than never. 5 years is hope. Laura is 35, has been working for 21 years, every day, every week, every month, for 2 decades. The work doesn't stop. The calculations don't stop. The fear doesn't stop. But they own 80 acres now. That's achievement. That's progress. That's what seamstress work started. 2 years into Smet, sewing for quarters led to this. 80 acres in Missouri. 700 in debt, but 80 acres. Rose graduate school, 1903. She's 16, smart, capable, wants to teach like her mother, gets certificate, starts teaching at country school. Earns $25 per month, $25. Laura remembers earning that in 1884, 19 years ago. Same wage, same work, nothing changes except who's doing it. But Rose's income helps. $25 monthly, $300 annually. That pays mortgage and then some. That's security. That's the first time since buying land that income reliably exceeds basic expenses. The family is transitioning from desperate poverty to working poverty to maybe something approaching stability. It's slow. Took 9 years. But it's happening. Almanzo is 47. His leg is worse. The decades of work have damaged it further. He can't do heavy labour anymore. Mostly supervises, does light work, manages property, plans. Rose and Laura do more of the physical labour now. Gender roles have inverted. Women working, man planning. It's not traditional, not normal, but normal is for people with options. The Wilders do what works. By 1905, they've been in Missouri 11 years. They own 80 acres, cleared maybe 5 acres total, have 200 apple trees producing now. Milk cow, 20 chickens, 2 pigs, a horse. The orchard brings $200 annually. Butter and eggs another $100. Rose is teaching $300. Total income $600 yearly. Expenses maybe $400. Surplus $200. $200 surplus. First time ever. First time in their entire marriage they have money left after paying for survival. First time they're not calculating whether they can afford to eat next week. This is what success looks like for the poor. Not wealth, not comfort, just surplus, just breathing room. Just the absence of constant terror. Laura is 38, looks 50, has worked every day for 24 years, teaching, seamstress, laundry, farm, garden, chickens, never stopped, never rested, never had the option to rest. But they have $200 surplus. That's worth every hour, every stitch, every walk to town carrying laundry, every calculation of whether they could afford bacon. Worth it. The seamstress years made this possible. 2 years, 1892 to 94, sewing for quarters in Smet, saved $100, bought 40 acres, led to this, 11 years later, 80 acres, stability, surplus. You can draw a direct line. Seamstress work to Missouri, purchase to survival, to expansion to stability. Every step necessary, every year required. You can't skip steps, can't rush time. Can only work and hope and survive until the mathematics finally shift in your favour. 1906, 12th year. They pay off the first 40 acres, 12 years of payments, $360 in interest paid over time, but it's done. 40 acres owned outright, no mortgage, theirs completely. They still owe $400 on the second 40, but that's manageable now. The surplus covers payments easily. They'll pay it off in 5 more years. 1911, when Laura is 44 and Almanzo is 54. After that, after 1911, no mortgage, no debt, 80 acres owned free and clear. That's security, real security. The kind where catastrophe doesn't mean losing everything, where a bad harvest doesn't mean starvation, where they can finally breathe without calculating survival. But that's 5 years away. 5 more years of work. 5 more years of hoping nothing catastrophic happens. 5 more years of surviving. They've survived 40 years of marriage so far. Catastrophes, poverty, illness, loss. Survived it all. 5 more years is nothing. The apple trees bloom in spring 1906. Thousands of white flowers covering 800 trees. Promise of harvest. Promise of income. Promise that the work continues paying off. Laura stands in the orchard and remembers Smet, remembers the dressmaker shop, remembers stitching fabric for 25 cents per day, remembers saving quarters, remembers the moment they had $100 and knew they could leave. That moment led to this, to 80 acres, to stability, to hope realised through decades of work. The seamstress years saved them. The Missouri years built on that salvation. The work never stopped, but it worked. Slowly, painfully, but it worked. The orchard blooms. The work continues. Life continues. That's enough. 1911. Laura Ingalls Wilder is 44 years old. The mortgage is paid. All of it. Both 40-acre parcels, 80 acres owned free and clear. No debt, no bank. No monthly calculations of whether they'll lose everything. For the first time in her life, Laura owns something completely. But ownership doesn't mean ease. Never does. The orchard produces well. $250 annually. Butter and eggs another $150. They're comfortable, not wealthy. Comfortable. There's a difference. Rose is 24. Teaching. Writing for newspapers. Living in San Francisco. Married now. Claire Gillette Lane. Married in 1909. Laura doesn't talk much about that wedding. Doesn't talk much about what happened in San Francisco that same year. Some things are too painful to voice, but Rose writes. Always writing. Articles, stories, ambitious, brilliant. Everything Laura wanted to be before poverty and seamstress work and survival became her entire existence. Maybe that's enough. Maybe watching your daughter achieve what you couldn't counts as success. Or maybe it just means you spent your life surviving so someone else could live. Laura stands in her kitchen. Actual kitchen. They built a real farmhouse. 1913. 10 rooms. Stone and wood. Proper construction. This isn't the log cabin. This is a house. A home. The kind of place she dreamed about when she was stitching fabric into Smet for 25 cents per day. 25 cents. She earned that in 1893. 18 years ago. Seems like another life. Another woman. Someone who doesn't exist anymore except in memory. The Missouri Ruralist contacts her. 1911. Farm magazine. Needs someone to write about farm life. About poultry. About practical matters. Woman's perspective. Would she be interested? Would she be interested? In writing? In being paid for words instead of stitches? In using her mind instead of her fingers? Yes, she's interested. But she's also 44. Never written professionally, never considered herself a writer. Rose is the writer. Laura is the woman who sewed and washed laundry and survived. Writers are different. Writers are educated, literary, not women who spent their youth calculating whether they could afford bacon. She writes anyway. First article, 1911. Favouring the big litters? About hog raising. Practical. Plain. Nothing literary, just information presented clearly. They pay her. They actually pay her. For words. For thoughts. For something that doesn't require walking 8 miles or scrubbing cloth until her hands bleed or stitching until her eyes blur. She writes more. Increasing the poultry product. The full pig crop. Practical articles. Farmer's wife writing about farmer's wife subjects. Nothing extraordinary, but competent. Clear. Useful. The ruralist keeps buying. She keeps writing. It's not much money. Few dollars per article. But it's income from thinking instead of physical labour. At 44, with a body worn from decades of work that matters, by 1915 she's a regular contributor, monthly column. As a farm woman thinks, about farm life, about women's work, about the economics of rural survival, the things she knows intimately, the things she lived. She writes about chickens and gardens and butter making, about managing household budgets, about work, always about work, because work is what she knows, work is what saved her, work is her entire identity. But something else is happening in the writing, something she doesn't quite recognise, a voice, a perspective, a way of seeing rural life that readers respond to. The ruralist gets letters, people like her columns, find them helpful, find them honest. Honest! That's what it is. She writes honestly, doesn't romanticize farm life, doesn't pretend poverty is noble or work is always rewarding, just tells the truth. Farming is hard. Women's work is harder. Survival requires calculation and discipline and acceptance that easy doesn't exist. Readers recognize this truth. Rural women, especially. They see themselves in her words. See their own struggles reflected honestly for once, instead of wrapped in platitudes about noble farmers and wholesome country living. Laura doesn't know she's building something. doesn't know these columns are apprenticeship, training, practice for something larger. She's just writing about what she knows, earning a few dollars, using skills she didn't know she possessed. Rose knows, though. Rose reads the columns, sees the potential. Her mother can write, really write, not just functional farm articles, actual writing, voice, perspective, truth. You should write about your childhood, Rose says. 1919. The pioneer days, your father, the homesteading, all of it. Laura dismisses this. Who wants to read about her childhood? About failure and poverty and moving from place to place because her father couldn't make anything work? About the baby who died? About the house that burned? About all the catastrophes? Everyone, Rose says, everyone wants to read about that. But Laura is 52 now, too old to start new careers, too tired from decades of work to imagine doing anything except maintaining the farm and writing her monthly column and accepting that this is her life. This is enough, except it isn't, not quite. There's something unfinished, something unsaid, a story that needs telling. The story of how a woman who lost everything found a way to save herself, who worked as a seamstress for 2 years and saved $118 and bought 40 acres of rocks and turned that into stability, who survived when survival seemed impossible. That story matters. That story is true. That story might help someone else who's drowning in poverty and calculating survival in pennies and wondering if work ever pays off. But she doesn't write it yet. Not yet. First, there's more living to do, more work, more survival, more of the life that might eventually become story. The articles continue, year after year. The farm woman thinks becomes her identity. She's known now, locally famous, the woman who writes honest truth about rural life, the woman who doesn't lie about how hard it is, and somewhere in those articles, in those years of writing, she's preparing, training, building the skills that will eventually tell the story that changes everything. The story of a little house on the prairie. But that's later. Right now, in 1911 through 1924, she's just a farm woman who writes, who survived seamstress work, who owns 80 acres free and clear, who finally has time to think instead of just survive. And thinking, it turns out, is dangerous. Thinking leads to questions. Questions lead to stories. Stories lead to places she can't yet imagine. But Rose knows. Rose has always known. Her mother's fingers saved the family once, stitching fabric, saving quarters, buying land. Maybe those same fingers can do something even more impossible. Maybe they can write words that last forever. 1930. The world collapses. Again. The stock market crashed in 29. Now it's 30 and the depression is everywhere. Banks failing. Farms foreclosing. People starving. The entire country drowning in the same poverty Laura knew in 1892. The same poverty that drove her to seamstress work. The same calculations of survival. Rocky Ridge is secure, mortgage paid, farm established. They're not wealthy, but they're stable. They survived the 1890s poverty. They can survive this, but Rose can't. Rose, who left Missouri for bigger things, who became a journalist, a novelist, a writer. Rose, who lived in San Francisco and New York and Europe. Rose, who was going to be everything Laura couldn't be. Rose is broke. The Depression destroyed her income, destroyed her publishing markets, destroyed the life she built. She returns to Rocky Ridge, 33 years old, divorced, broken. Returning to the farm she spent her youth trying to escape. Laura sees her daughter and sees herself, sees the woman who returned to Smet in 1892, broke, failed, starting over, history repeating across generations. But Rose has an idea, has always has ideas. This one might be brilliant or might be desperate, maybe both. Write your autobiography, Rose says. The whole story, childhood, marriage, the seamstress years, Missouri, all of it. I'll help. Laura is 63, too old for new careers, too tired from decades of farm work to imagine doing anything except maintaining the orchard and writing occasional articles and accepting that her life is what it is. Complete, finished, done. But Rose insists, and Rose knows publishing, knows markets, knows what sells, knows that true stories of frontier survival sell, knows her mother's life is exactly the kind of story America needs right now, in the Depression, when everyone is poor and desperate and calculating survival. They start working. 1931, Laura writes by hand, long manuscript, everything, every memory, every hardship, every failure. The baby who died, the house that burned, Almanzo's stroke, the poverty, the seamstress work, the journey to Missouri, all of it. It's too honest, too brutal, too much truth. Publishers will hate it. It's not the wholesome pioneer story they want. It's real, raw, painful, true. Pioneer Girl. That's what she calls it. Her autobiography. The story of a woman who survived. Rose edits, tries to sell it. Publishers reject it. Too dark, too honest, too real. They want inspiration. Want wholesome values, want pioneer spirit. Not poverty and failure and a woman sewing for quarters to escape starvation. The manuscript sits, rejected, unsold. Laura's life story. The story of how seamstress work saved her. Nobody wants it. But Rose has another idea. Take the childhood parts, the innocent parts, before marriage, before poverty, before failure. Make it a children's book. Make it about a little girl on the prairie. Make it wholesome. Make it sellable. Laura resists. Her story isn't innocent, isn't wholesome, is about survival and work and loss. You can't turn that into children's literature. Watch me, Rose says. They work together. 1932. Rose editing heavily. Some say she wrote most of it. Some say Laura wrote it and Rose just edited. The truth is probably complicated. They collaborated. Mother and daughter, both desperate, both needing this to work, both knowing that words might save them the way stitches saved them 40 years ago. Little House in the Big Woods, published 1932, Laura Ingalls Wilder, author, 65 years old, first book, about a little girl in Wisconsin, about family and survival and work, about innocence and hardship and love. It sells, actually sells, not millions, not immediately, but it sells. Reviews are good, children like it, teachers buy it, libraries order it, Harper wants more. Another book, Laura writes Farmer Boy, about Almanzo's childhood, about his strong legs before the stroke, about the boy he was before catastrophe, before poverty, before becoming a man whose wife had to save him with seamstress work. That book sells too. Now Harper wants the rest, the whole series. Laura's entire childhood, book after book, the story of a girl growing up on the frontier, the story before poverty, before failure, before adult, Laura learned that survival cost everything. She writes, 66, 67, 68, one book per year, Little House on the Prairie, on the banks of Plum Creek, by the shores of Silver Lake, The Long Winter, Little Town on the Prairie. Each book sells better than the last. Each book building an audience. Children reading, adults reading. Everyone discovering the story of a girl on the frontier. A girl who doesn't know yet that she'll lose everything. That she'll work as a seamstress. That she'll save quarters. That those quarters will buy 40 acres of rocks that become stability. The books don't tell that part. Stop before marriage. Before poverty. Before truth. End with Laura becoming a teacher, marrying Almanzo. Wholesome conclusion, happy ending. The truth comes later. In books she doesn't write yet. In stories too painful for children. In the parts she remembers when she wakes at night and calculates how close they came to losing everything. How many times they almost failed. How seamstress work was the difference between survival and destruction. By 1943 she's published 8 books. 76 years old. Famous now. Award-winning author. Libraries named after her. Children writing letters. Teachers assigning her books in schools. Laura Ingalls Wilder. Author. The woman who wrote about A Little House on the Prairie. The woman who captured frontier childhood. The woman who gave America a vision of wholesome pioneer values. Nobody knows about the seamstress. Nobody knows about the quarters. Nobody knows that the woman who wrote these wholesome books spent 2 years stitching fabric for 25 cents per day, calculating whether she could afford to eat. Nobody knows that everything in these books, every story, every memory, every moment, exists because she saved $118. The books don't tell that story. The books tell the story before, the innocent story, the marketable story, the story that sells. But Laura knows, every time she signs a book, every time she receives a royalty check, every time someone writes to say how much they love the Little House books, she knows. Those books exist because her fingers saved her family. First through stitching, then through writing. The same fingers, the same survival instinct. The same calculation that work might save you if you just don't stop. The seamstress made the author possible. The quarters bought the land that bought the stability that bought the time to write. Every word she published traces back to 1892, to De Smet, to the dressmaker shop, to the decision to work and save and survive. Those fingers, those remarkable fingers. First they stitched fabric, then they wrote history, and millions of children would read her words never knowing they existed because a desperate woman once worked for quarters and saved every single one. 1957. Laura Ingalls Wilder dies, 90 years old, at home at Rocky Ridge Farm, the place she bought with $118 saved from seamstress work 63 years earlier. The Little House books have sold millions by now. Millions? The woman who sewed for quarters wrote books that made her famous, made her legacy, made her immortal. But immortality is strange. The books are fiction, not really fiction. Fictionalized autobiography. The truth bent to fit children's literature, the hard parts softened, the poverty disguised, the seamstress work erased completely. Generations will read about Laura Ingalls, the girl, the pioneer, the symbol of frontier strength. They won't read about Laura Wilder, the woman, the seamstress, the desperate mother who walked 8 miles to earn 25 cents. The real person who survived real poverty through real work. That story stayed hidden. In Pioneer Girl, the unpublished manuscript, the autobiography too honest to sell, hidden in archives, waiting. Waiting for a world ready to hear the truth instead of the wholesome version. It took until 2014, 61 years after her death. Pamela Smith Hill edited Pioneer Girl, published it. The real story, the unvarnished truth, the seamstress years, the poverty, the failure, the loss, everything the children's books couldn't say. And readers discovered something shocking. The beloved children's author was real, suffered real hardship, worked real jobs, survived real poverty. The wholesome Pioneer Girl grew up to be a woman who sewed for quarters and calculated survival in pennies and nearly lost everything multiple times. That truth makes the books more powerful, not less. Knowing that the woman who wrote them survived what she wrote about, knowing that her success came through work, actual work, seamstress work, wage labour. The kind of work that grinds you down but keeps you alive. The scholars study this now, the seamstress years, the hidden labour, the economic strategy that saved the family, the work that made literature possible. They recognise what Laura knew. You can draw a direct line from 1892 to 1932, from stitching to writing, from survival to legacy. Rocky Ridge Farm is a museum now, preserved, visited by thousands annually. They walk through the 10-room house, see the kitchen where Laura wrote, see the desk, see the manuscripts, see the evidence of literary achievement. But they don't see the log cabin, don't see the dirt floor, don't see the 168 square feet where 3 people survived winter, don't see the poverty that required quarters saved over 2 years to escape. Don't see the seamstress work that started everything. That history is hidden, not deliberately, just erased by time, by the natural process of remembering success and forgetting struggle, remembering the author and forgetting the seamstress, remembering Little House and forgetting de Smet. But the truth persists in documents, in timelines, in the mortgage records showing September 21st, 1894, 40 acres, $500, 100 down. That down payment came from somewhere, came from work, came from fingers that stitched fabric in a South Dakota dressmaker shop, came from a woman desperate enough to work for quarters and disciplined enough to save everyone. That truth matters more than the fiction, matters more than the wholesome pioneer image, matters because it's real. Because millions of people face the same calculations Laura faced, the same poverty, the same choice between giving up or working for cents and hoping it's enough. Laura's story says work might save you, might not, but might. And might is enough when you have nothing else. Might is enough to keep stitching, keep saving, keep walking 8 miles for 25 cents, keep surviving. The Little House book sold over 60 million copies. 60 million! Translated into 40 languages, made into television series, made into cultural phenomenon, made Laura Ingalls Wilder into American icon, all because she could sew, all because she saved quarters, all because she survived long enough to have time to write. All because seamstress work bought 40 acres that became 80 acres, that became stability, that became time, that became books, that became immortality. Those fingers, those remarkable, desperate, determined fingers, they saved a family, then they saved a legacy, then they gave millions of readers a window into frontier life, then they became part of American literary history, and it all started in a dressmaker shop in Smet, South Dakota, in 1892, with a woman who had nothing except skill and desperation and the absolute certainty that stopping meant dying. She didn't stop. She stitched. She saved. She survived. She wrote. She became legend. That's the real story, not the wholesome pioneer tale, not the children's literature version. The real story of a woman who worked for quarters and saved them and bought land and survived, and eventually had time to write and wrote books that outlived her by generations. Laura Ingalls Wilder, seamstress, author, survivor, legend. The fingers that stitched fabric wrote history. Literally. Those same fingers, that same determination, that same calculation that work might possibly save you if you just don't quit. She didn't quit. Not in 1892, not in 1894, not in 1900, not in 1932, never quit, just worked, survived, wrote, won, and somewhere in all those words, in all those books, in all those millions of copies sold, in all that legacy, is the truth she knew all along. Work saves you, if you're desperate enough, disciplined enough, lucky enough. If you work for quarters and save everyone, if you walk 8 miles for 25 cents, if you stitch until your fingers ache and your eyes blur and your back screams, if you refuse to quit even when quitting seems rational, work might save you, might give you 40 acres, might give you stability, might give you time to write, might give you immortality, or might just give you one more day, one more week, one more year, one more chance to survive. That's enough. That has to be enough, because that's all anyone gets. One more chance, one more day, one more choice to work or quit. Laura chose work, every time, for 60 years, from teaching to seamstress to farmer to writer, always working, always surviving, always calculating, always choosing one more day. Those choices built a legacy. Those fingers wrote history. And the story continues, because Laura's story isn't just hers, it's her daughter's too. Rose, the brilliant, broken, complicated woman who returned to Rocky Ridge in the Depression, who helped her mother write, who might have written more than anyone admits, who had her own tragedies, her own failures, her own desperate survival. Rose Wilder Lane, writer, editor, collaborator, survivor of something Laura never discussed publicly, something that happened in San Francisco in 1909, something that changed Rose forever, something that ended her marriage and broke something inside her that never quite healed. A stillborn baby, a marriage destroyed, a woman shattered, a story that needs telling. But that story is next.